Welcome back, horror lovers. Tonight, did you know that a lot of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed yet? I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to like the video and leave a comment below. Your interaction really helps the channel grow and allows more people to see my content. Thanks so much for your support. I never bought into any of that dark web mumbo-jumbo, ghosts, rituals, those creepy stories people post online late at night for attention. I've always been a skeptic, the type to roll my eyes at the paranormal. But when it comes to grief, logic bends in ways you'd never expect. My little brother, Alex, passed away 8 years ago. He was only 15. It was a freak accident. He slipped on a wet dock during a family fishing trip, fell into the water, and even though I was right there, I couldn't save him. It all happened too fast. Since then, Christmas hasn't felt right. Our family still hangs up his stocking. It's empty, of course, but it's there, just in case, I guess. This year, December hit me harder than it had in a long time. I don't know why. Maybe because I was finally old enough to realize how much time I'd spent without him. Maybe because the older I got, the foggier my memories of him became. He deserved to be remembered, and it terrified me that I might forget. It was late one night, a week before Christmas, when I came across the ad. I wasn't on the dark web looking for anything creepy. I wasn't even looking for anything specific. I'd fallen into a rabbit hole, watching videos about old Christmas traditions, which led to forgotten urban legends, and finally, a video titled "They Came Home for Christmas, Dark Web Rituals." I clicked on it, not because I believed it, but because I was bored and avoiding sleep. The video was what you'd expect, some guy talking with a distorted voice and flickering video edits. But something he said stood out to me. "There's a ritual floating around the dark web," he said. "It's not for fame or fortune. It's for the lonely, for those grieving. It promises to bring your loved ones back for Christmas Eve. Just for one night. They say it works, but there's a price. You have to want it badly enough to find it." I would have clicked off, but then the video described something weird. He talked about the stocking. They say you have to hang the loved one's stocking, just as you always do. But you don't leave it empty. You leave it open, as an invitation. Alex's stocking. That detail stopped me cold. The guy continued with more rules, most of them sounding ridiculous. You had to perform the ritual at midnight on December 23rd. You had to recite some lines over the stocking. You had to leave your front door unlocked on Christmas Eve. It was all so over the top and stupid that I would have shut it off, except for a moment, I felt like the guy was speaking directly to me. I hadn't talked about Alex's stocking to anyone. I didn't even think about it much myself. But I knew, as soon as the words left his mouth, that I was going to do it. I don't know why. Grief makes people do strange things. The instructions were surprisingly easy to find. After a few hours digging through forums and pages buried deep online, I found what I was looking for. I won't share the website, not because I'm scared you'll try it, but because I don't want to give it more attention. It didn't look like anything special, just a plain white page with black text. No photos, no colors, just a title, Bring Them Home for Christmas. The rules were the same as the video described, but they were more specific. 1. Hang the loved one's stocking, wide open. 2. At midnight on December 23rd, say these words 3 times. Christmas is a time for home, a time for love, a time for those we've lost. On Christmas Eve, leave your front door unlocked. At exactly 8 p.m., they will arrive. At the bottom of the page, there was one final warning: they will not look the same. Do not ask them to leave. Do not send them back. That line gave me pause. I didn't like the sound of it. But the more I read it, the more I rationalized it. If this was some elaborate prank, the warning was just there for effect. If it was fake, then I hang up Alex's stocking and look silly for 5 minutes, nothing more. But if there was even the slightest chance it worked, I told myself I was doing it for closure, to say goodbye, to feel like I tried something. I didn't expect it to work, because that would be insane. But I still spent the next few days preparing. I cleaned the house as if Alex would notice. I found his stocking in a box of Christmas decorations. It was cream, with his name stitched into the fabric in white thread. It was harder than I expected to look at it. I sat there for a long time, holding it in my hands, staring at his name. Alex, I said it out loud to myself, because I hadn't in a long time. The sound of it made the room feel heavy, like something was listening. I hung the stocking on the fireplace and opened it, just as the rules said. December 23rd came faster than I wanted. I stayed up alone in the living room, the only light coming from the Christmas tree. The house was silent. I didn't even turn on the TV. I kept looking at the clock on my phone. 11:57, 11:58, 11:59. I don't know what I expected to feel when it hit midnight, but when it finally did, I didn't feel anything, just a weird emptiness in my chest. I stared at Alex's stocking, took a deep breath, and said the words, Christmas is a time for home, a time for love, a time for those we've lost. I waited. Nothing happened. I said it again. Christmas is a time for home, a time for love, a time for those we've lost. Still nothing. The stocking swayed gently, probably from me breathing too close to it. I said it one final time. Christmas is a time for home, a time for love, a time for those we've lost. I stayed up for another hour, watching the stocking like an idiot. It never moved. The house didn't shake. Nothing glowed or whispered or did whatever I was half expecting. Around 1 a.m., I finally sighed, shut off the tree lights, and went to bed. The next day was Christmas Eve, and I didn't think about it much. I felt dumb for even trying the ritual. But at least I tried something, that's what I told myself. I spent the day baking cookies with my mom, Sarah, and watching old Christmas movies. For the first time in a while, it felt kind of normal, almost happy. I'd forgotten all about the ritual by the time evening rolled around. That is, until my phone buzzed. It was 7:59 p.m. I don't know why I noticed the time, probably because my brain connected it back to the website's instructions. I sat up on the couch and stared at the clock on the wall. 8 p.m. The doorbell rang. The doorbell's chime froze me in place. I didn't move right away. I just sat there, staring at the door, as if I'd misheard it. My mom, who was sitting across the room scrolling on her phone, looked up. "Did you order something?" she asked. I shook my head. No. We weren't expecting anyone. It was Christmas Eve. No one knocks on your door at 8 p.m. on Christmas Eve unless it's a neighbor dropping off cookies or carolers making the rounds. But we don't have carolers here. I don't even know our neighbors well enough for cookies. The doorbell rang again, this time followed by a knock. 3 knocks, steady and slow. Knock. 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 My mom stood up and gave me a look. "Well, are you going to check?" I don't know why, but I didn't want to. Something about it didn't sit right with me. I mean, we live in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing ever happens here. But the way the knock sounded, calm and deliberate, made my stomach twist. But I stood up anyway. Slowly, I made my way to the door, every creak in the hardwood sounding louder than usual. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment before I finally turned it and pulled the door open. Standing on our porch was a boy. At first, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think. He looked so much like Alex that my brain couldn't process it. Same dark brown hair that stuck up in the back, same wide eyes that always made him look like he was on the verge of laughing. Even the clothes, a navy hoodie and jeans, looked like something Alex would have worn. But there was something off, something subtle I couldn't put my finger on. The boy just stood there, hands at his sides, staring at me. His lips twitched into a smile, but it was small and unnatural, forced almost. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. "Alex?" I whispered. His smile widened just a little. "You let me in," he said quietly. His voice sounded right, like Alex's voice had all those years ago. But the way he spoke, the tone, was wrong. Empty. I felt my mom step up behind me. "Who is it?" She stopped mid-sentence. Her hand gripped my arm. Oh my God. Neither of us said anything for a few moments. The boy stood there, unmoving. Finally, my mom found her voice. "Who are you?" He tilted his head slightly. "You let me in," he said. It was like a statement, not a question. His voice didn't waver. I don't know what came over me, but I stepped back and opened the door just enough for him to enter. He didn't wait for permission. He stepped inside, one slow footstep at a time, and looked around the house like he was trying to remember it. "Alex," my mom whispered behind me. He didn't answer. He just turned to face us, his hands still hanging at his sides. He smiled again. "I'm home," he said. The next hour felt strange. I don't know how else to explain it. The boy, who looked like Alex, sat on the couch with us while Christmas music played softly in the background. My mom was trying to hold it together, but she kept staring at him, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I was too. He looked like Alex, but he didn't act like him. He didn't fidget. He didn't joke. He didn't talk unless we said something to him first, and even when he did answer, his responses were short, simple. "Are you hungry?" my mom asked at one point. He turned his head slowly to look at her. "No." "What? What do you remember?" I asked him. The boy's smile twitched again. "You let me in," he said. He said that a lot. Too much. Every time he spoke, those words were right there, like they were glued to his tongue. "You let me in." My mom tried to brush his hair back, an old habit of hers. He flinched, not just a small flinch either. His whole body jerked like her hand was fire. "Don't," he said. My mom froze, her hand hovering in the air. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." He stared at her with that same, small, empty smile. "I'm home." The evening dragged on in a way that made the owls feel heavier. The lights on the trees seemed too bright, the music sounded too quiet. Every so often, I'd look at the boy sitting across from me, and I'd get this nagging feeling that we shouldn't have let him in. Around 10 p.m., my mom whispered to me in the kitchen, "We need to figure out what's going on." I nodded. "It's not him, you know that, right?" Her eyes darted toward the living room. "But he looks like him, and his voice." I didn't know what to say. I didn't have answers. All I knew was that the boy sitting in our living room wasn't Alex. He was something else. From the other room, his voice carried through the silence, "You let me in. You can't send me back." We both stopped talking. My mom's face went pale. What did he just say? I turned to look, but he wasn't on the couch anymore. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at us with that same unnatural smile. "I'm home." When he said "I'm home," my mom and I just stared at him. I couldn't move, couldn't even look away. It wasn't what he said, it was the way he stood there, perfectly still, hands at his sides, like he was waiting for something. Finally, my mom forced a smile, though I could see how uneasy she was. "Why don't you sit back down?" The boy tilted his head slightly, eyes fixed on us. "Okay." He turned around and walked back to the couch. I don't know why, but the sound of his footsteps echoed in my ears, like they were heavier than they should have been. He sat down exactly where he'd been before, hands on his knees, staring ahead at nothing. "Let's talk," my mom whispered to me, pulling me further into the hallway where he couldn't hear us. "What do we do?" I shook my head. "I don't know." "He's not." I lowered my voice even more. "He's not Alex." She bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes. "But he looks like him." "That doesn't mean anything." "Look at him, Mom. He doesn't act like Alex. He barely talks, he barely moves." "You let me in." The voice came from the living room, loud and clear. I turned the corner, and the boy was sitting there again, looking straight ahead. He hadn't moved, but somehow, I knew he'd heard every word we said. The hours dragged. My mom and I stayed in the kitchen, whispering back and forth while keeping an eye on him. He didn't follow us. He just sat there on the couch, staring at the fireplace like he was waiting for something. At one point, I went upstairs to get a blanket for my mom. She looked like she was about to break down, and I figured wrapping her up in something warm might help, even a little. As I climbed the stairs, I glanced over my shoulder at the living room. The boy didn't move, but I swear his head turned, just slightly, to watch me leave. When I came back down, my mom wasn't in the kitchen anymore. The blanket slipped from my hands. "Mom?" I heard her voice coming from the living room. "Honey, he's asking for you." I stepped closer. My mom was sitting on the edge of the couch now, right next to the boy. She looked pale, like she was exhausted, but she was staring at him with a look I couldn't place, half disbelief, half sadness. The boy's head turned toward me, slowly. "You let me in," he said softly. My mom looked up at me, her voice shaky. "I think it's him." I felt my stomach drop. "Mom, no, it's not." "Look at him," she said. "He remembers things, little things about Christmas. He just told me about the ornament Alex made in kindergarten. You remember that, don't you?" I did. It was a little clay star Alex had painted gold. It hung on our tree every year. The boy smiled at me, his lips twitching unnaturally. "It's my favorite ornament," he said. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe it so badly that it hurt. But there was something about the way he said it, something hollow. The words were right, but the feeling behind them wasn't. "Mom," I said gently. "It's not him." My mom's face fell. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked back at the boy, tears starting to roll down her cheeks. "But it looks like him." I didn't know how to answer that. The boy turned back to the fireplace, his hands still resting perfectly on his knees. For a long time, none of us said anything. I watched the lights on the tree flicker, the glow reflecting off his face. "You let me in," he whispered again. And for the first time, his smile faded. We decided to go to bed not long after that. I think my mom couldn't handle being in the same room with him anymore. I didn't blame her. I felt like the longer we stayed there, the heavier the air got, like something was pressing down on us. Before we went upstairs, I hesitated at the base of the stairs. Are you going to sleep?" I asked the boy. He didn't turn his head, just his eyes. "I don't sleep." That was all he said. I didn't sleep much that night either. I stayed in my room, door closed, listening to the silence in the house. My mom's room was right across the hall, and I could hear her tossing and turning. She was probably crying, but I didn't check on her. I didn't know how to comfort her when I couldn't make sense of what was happening myself. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember was waking up to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving down the hallway. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. My room was pitch black, the only light coming from a small crack under the door. The footsteps stopped outside my room. I held my breath. The doorknob turned. It didn't open. The footsteps moved away. The next morning, I found the boy sitting in the exact same spot on the couch, staring at the now dark Christmas tree. He hadn't moved all night. His hands were still on his knees, his posture perfectly straight. I don't know what he was. I don't know where he came from. But he wasn't my brother, and I knew we had to figure out how to get him out of the house. The boy was still there the next morning, sitting exactly where we'd left him. He didn't look tired. He didn't look like anything. He just sat there, motionless, staring at the empty fireplace like it had something to show him. I stepped into the living room carefully. "Good morning," I said, testing his reaction. He turned his head toward me, that same unsettling smile creeping onto his face. "You let me in." I didn't know why I bothered talking to him at all. It felt like he understood just enough to mimic the words you wanted to hear, but nothing else. Like someone trying to play a role they didn't understand. My mom came downstairs a few minutes later. She looked awful. Her eyes were puffy, and it was clear she hadn't slept. She paused at the bottom of the stairs when she saw him sitting there. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied. It was the first time he'd used a normal greeting. My mom blinked at him, almost hopeful for a second, but I noticed something. He didn't smile this time. His face stayed blank. We tried to go about Christmas Day as normally as we could. It was almost laughable how much we were pretending. My mom made pancakes, Alex's favorite, and set a plate in front of the boy. He didn't eat them. He just stared at the food like he didn't know what to do with it. "You don't like them?" my mom asked. The boy looked at her, his expression blank. "I don't eat." We sat in silence after that, the uneaten pancakes getting cold in front of him. My mom tried turning on Christmas music, and for a moment, it almost felt like things were okay again. I could see her looking at him out of the corner of her eye, holding on to some desperate hope that this really was Alex, that maybe this was just how he came back. I wanted to tell her to stop, to remind her that it wasn't him, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Around noon, my mom went upstairs to shower, leaving me alone with the boy. I sat in the armchair across from him, pretending to look at my phone while keeping an eye on him. He hadn't moved since breakfast. "You're not him," I said finally. The boy turned his head toward me. His smile was gone. "I'm home," he said flatly. "No, you're not." I leaned forward. "Who are you? What are you?" He didn't answer right away. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer at all. But then he said quietly, "You let me in. You can't send me back there." It was again that same phrase. I tried to remember the exact words from the website. Do not send them back. What did that even mean? I pushed further. "Where did you come from?" He blinked at me slowly, his expression empty. "It's Christmas. I'm home." Something about the way he said that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just what he said, it was like he was practicing it, Like those words didn't come naturally to him, but he knew he was supposed to say them. "You're not supposed to be here," I whispered. The boy's head tilted slightly. "You let me in." When my mom came back downstairs, she looked a little better, though the smile she wore was clearly forced. She tried talking to him again, asking questions about Christmases past, little details like the time Alex accidentally knocked over the tree, or the year he got his first bike. The boy answered most of them, but the responses were mechanical. He got the details right, but there was no feeling behind the words, no warmth, just facts, like someone reciting a script. My mom started to notice it too. By late afternoon, I could see the cracks in her resolve. "He's not Alex," I told her when we were alone in the kitchen. She didn't argue this time. She just nodded, her hands gripping the counter. "Then who is he?" "I don't know." I glanced at the living room. "But we need to figure out what to do." The website said not to send him back, but why not? My mom interrupted. I shook my head. "I don't know. I didn't think it was real." She looked at me then, her voice low. "Do you think he'll leave on his own?" We both knew the answer to that. He wouldn't. As the day went on, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier. We stopped pretending. My mom didn't ask him any more questions. We didn't turn on music. The boy stayed on the couch, silent and still, watching the fireplace. As the light outside began to fade, when it got dark, my mom whispered, "Maybe we should just leave." The idea sounded tempting, but something about it didn't sit right with me. "And what happens when we come back?" I asked. "Will he still be here?" She didn't have an answer for that. It was nearly 9 p.m. when I finally worked up the courage to go back to the website. I pulled out my laptop and found the page again. Same plain text, same instructions. I skimmed through it, hoping I'd missed something, anything that could help us. And then I saw it. A single line near the bottom I hadn't paid attention to before. "They will leave at midnight, but only if they are welcomed properly." I read it over and over, trying to figure out what it meant. Welcomed properly? What did that mean? "You let me in. You can't send me back." I looked up. The boy was standing at the edge of the living room, watching me. For the first time since he arrived, he wasn't smiling. The boy stood at the edge of the room, staring at me, his expression blank. For the first time since he arrived, I felt an urgency to do something. Midnight was coming, and whatever welcomed properly meant, I knew it had to happen soon. I glanced at my mom, who was frozen in place beside me. She looked at the boy, then at me, her voice barely a whisper. "What did you find?" I turned the laptop screen toward her and pointed at the line. "They will leave at midnight, but only if they are welcomed properly." "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know," I said, trying to think through it. Maybe it's not enough to let him in. Maybe we have to release him. Acknowledge he doesn't belong here. The boy's voice broke through the silence. "You let me in. You can't send me back." We both turned to face him. He hadn't moved, but somehow his presence felt closer. We waited in silence as the minutes ticked by, the air thick with tension. My mom clutched my arm, her breathing shallow. I watched the clock on the wall. It was 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until midnight. I stood up, swallowing hard. "We need to talk to him," I said quietly. "What do you mean?" "Just trust me." I walked toward the boy, my heart pounding, but I forced myself to speak calmly. "You don't belong here," I said softly. His head tilted slightly, his eyes unblinking. "I'm home." "No," I said firmly. "You're not Alex. We let you in, but this isn't your home. You need to leave." His lips twitched into that small, unnatural smile again. "You let me in." "I know," I said, "but it's time to go." For the first time, his expression changed. The smile faded completely, replaced by something that almost looked sad. He stared at me, unmoving. "I can't leave," he said quietly. "You can," I insisted, my voice shaking. "The rules say you leave at midnight." "That's the deal, isn't it? You came for Christmas, and now it's time to go." The boy blinked slowly, then turned his head toward the clock on the wall. 11:52 p.m. The seconds ticked away, one by one, the sound filling the room. "Say it," my mom whispered. "Say it out loud." I took a deep breath, looking at him. "Thank you for coming, but you're not supposed to be here. You're not Alex, and we're letting you go now." The boy stared at me, his expression blank, and for a long moment, he didn't say anything. 11:58. "You don't need to stay anymore," I continued, my voice softer now. "It's okay. You can go back." His head turned to me again. "You're sending me back." "No," I said carefully. "We're letting you go." The clock hit 11:59, and something shifted in the room. The air seemed to grow colder, though I can't explain how. The boy looked at me one last time, his face expressionless. "I'm not home," he said quietly. I nodded. "No, you're not." The lights on the Christmas tree flickered, the glow dimming just slightly. My mom and I watched as the boy turned slowly toward the door. He didn't say anything. He didn't even look back. He just walked, slow, deliberate steps that echoed across the floor. We followed him at a distance, watching as he opened the front door and stepped outside into the night. The snow was still falling softly, and for a moment, he stood there on the porch, his shoulders straight, his back to us. Then, as the clock struck midnight, he walked down the steps and into the darkness. We waited for a long time, staring at the open door. The cold air blew in, but the house felt strangely lighter. The next morning, Christmas Day, my mom and I sat quietly in the living room. We didn't talk about it, not directly. The boy was gone, and the house was finally still. I glanced at the fireplace, where Alex's stocking still hung, empty and open. "I think we should put it away," my mom said softly. I nodded. Yeah, I think so too. She carefully took the stocking down, folding it in her hands. Do you think? She paused, shaking her head. Never mind. I knew what she was going to ask. Do you think it was him? But I already knew the answer. Whatever we let in, whatever stood in our house for those 2 days, it wasn't Alex. It wasn't my brother. As much as I miss him, as much as I wish he could come back, I know now that some things aren't meant to return. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. And some invitations should never be accepted. Alright, so, I'm not your spooky story kind of guy. Never believed in ghosts, goblins, or any of that supernatural jazz. I'm the practical one in the family, the boring grown-up, you know? The one who probably ruined Santa Claus a little too early for the kids. But after what happened with my niece, Chloe, I'm starting to think maybe I don't have it all figured out. Chloe was 6, and let me tell you, this kid was pure sunshine. Still got all excited about Santa, the Easter Bunny, the whole 9 yards. Her parents, my older sister, Sarah, and her husband, Mark, are good people, but life's been throwing them curveballs. They're always running around, working like crazy, paying bills, and just trying to keep their heads above water while raising 2 little ones. So, a few weeks back, they asked me to watch Chloe for the weekend. They needed a breather, and honestly, who could say no to Chloe? She's my favorite niece, hands down. No offense to the others. Things started getting weird that Saturday. We were chilling on the couch, watching some cheesy Christmas movie. You know, the kind where everyone's got perfect teeth and it snows on cue. Chloe turns to me, her eyes huge, and tugs on my shirt. Uncle Ben, she says, do you think I could talk to Santa? Talk to him? I asked, you mean, like, write him a letter? No, she shook her head, pigtails bouncing. Like, really talk to him. On a call. Tommy at school said he got to FaceTime with Santa, and Santa knew stuff that nobody else knew. Can I, please? Now, I'm stumped. I figured Tommy's folks probably downloaded some app or used one of those online Santa chat things. They're a dime a dozen these days, right? Harmless fun. I'll see what I can do, kiddo, I told her, and she practically lit up the room with her smile. Later that night, while Chloe was busy demolishing a plate of spaghetti, I hopped on my laptop. I started Googling Santa call services, and yeah, there were a ton of them. Most looked pretty legit, actors in Santa suits, ready to video chat with your kid. A bit pricey, but hey, it's Christmas, right? I was about to close all the tabs, thinking I could probably just find a good Santa video on YouTube and fake it. Then, I saw it. A new link. It wasn't there before. It wasn't part of the search results. It just appeared. A plain, black text hyperlink at the bottom of my browser. It said, Virtual Santa, 100% personalized experience. Weird, right? No fancy graphics, no description, no company logo, nothing to tell you where it came from. It was like it materialized out of thin air. Now, I can't explain why I clicked it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I just wanted to see Chloe's face light up. Maybe I'm an idiot. Whatever the reason, I clicked. The link took me to this blank, black web page. No ads, no pop-ups, just one line of white text. For a truly personal Santa experience, enter the child's first name. Okay, now I'm officially creeped out. But, like a moth to a flame, I typed in Chloe and hit enter. The screen changed. A message popped up. Thank you. Santa is ready to meet Chloe. Instructions have been sent. Instructions? I checked my email, and sure enough, there was a message from some address I'd never seen before. The subject line? Santa is ready. The email was short and to the point. It had a video call link and a time, 8 p.m. sharp. This is where I should have stopped. Seriously, a random link from a mystery sender? It had scam written all over it. But the email looked clean. No attachments, no requests for money, just a simple link. Against my better judgment, and believe me, I was arguing with myself, I decided to go through with it. 8 p.m. Chloe was practically vibrating with excitement, bouncing in front of my laptop. I clicked the link, half expecting my computer to explode or something. Instead, the screen went black, and this soft jingle, like sleigh bells in the distance, started playing from the speakers. Then, the screen lit up. And there he was. Santa Claus. Or, someone who looked exactly like him. The suit was perfect, the fluffy white beard, the little round glasses, the whole deal. And this wasn't some cheap, Party City get-up. It looked real. But it wasn't just a costume. It was him. He felt real. His smile was warm, but his eyes were sharp. Like he was actually seeing us, Well, hello there, Chloe, Santa said, his voice deep and jolly, just like in the movies. Merry Christmas. Have you been a good girl this year? Chloe gasped. She nodded so hard I thought her head might fall off. Yes, Santa. I've been super good. Santa chuckled. Oh, I know you have. I've been keeping an eye on you. I saw you helping your mommy with the laundry last Tuesday. And you shared your favorite teddy bear with your little brother, didn't you? Chloe's jaw dropped. She turned to me, eyes wide as saucers. Uncle Ben, how did he know that? I had no answer. How could I? Santa kept talking, mentioning all these little things about Chloe's life, the pink dress she wore for picture day, the secret hiding spot she had with her dad, even the bedtime story I read to her the night before. I was frozen, trying to figure out how this was even possible. Chloe, of course, was eating it up. Santa, can I come to the North Pole someday? She asked, bouncing in her seat. Santa smiled. Oh, dear, the North Pole is a very special place, but it's not quite ready for visitors just yet. Maybe soon. Okay, that was it. I was done. This was too weird, even for me. All right, Chloe, I said, reaching for the laptop, let's say goodbye to Santa now. Santa's eyes snapped to mine, and I froze. Not yet, he said, his voice still calm, but there was something else there now, something that sent a shiver down my spine. I haven't told Chloe her special Christmas surprise. Chloe clapped her hands. A surprise? What is it? Santa leaned closer to the screen, and his smile seemed to stretch just a little too wide. I've invited you to visit me, Chloe. Would you like that? Yes, Chloe shouted, practically jumping out of her skin. Santa's face lit up. Wonderful. I'll see you very soon, my dear. The screen went black. I closed the laptop, my heart pounding in my chest. That's enough Santa for tonight, I said, trying to sound normal, but my voice was probably shaking. Chloe didn't argue. She just sat there, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. Santa's so nice, she whispered as I tucked her into bed. Little did I know, things were about to get a whole lot worse. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. Not just quiet, but empty. Chloe's bed was made, neat as a pin, but she was gone. Vanished. I searched the house 3 times, screaming her name until my throat was raw. Nothing. Then I saw it. A note on the kitchen table. It was written in that wobbly, kid handwriting that breaks your heart. Santa said he's taking me to the North Pole. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. I dropped the note. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew. I knew she wasn't coming back. Not on her own. Not from wherever Santa had taken her. That was 2 days ago. 2 days of hell. And nobody believes me. Not really. The cops are calling it a runaway situation. My sister and Mark are falling apart, barely holding it together. And me? I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. But that image, that Santa, the way he looked at us through the screen, it's burned into my brain. I should have known better. I should have said no. I should have ripped the laptop out of the wall the second he started talking. After I found the note, I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at it. The whole thing played back in my head like a broken record. The Santa call. His words. Chloe's excited little face. It all felt like some twisted dream now. But the note in my hand? That was real. My niece was gone. And some sick, twisted part of me knew the cops weren't going to find her with their usual methods. First, I called Sarah, my sister. Hardest phone call I've ever had to make. What do you mean? She's missing. Sarah's voice cracked through the phone. What do you mean? Santa took her. How do you even explain something like that? How do you tell your sister that you let her daughter talk to some creep on the internet who called himself Santa, and now she's gone? I sounded insane, even to myself. The cops showed up an hour later. 2 officers took one look at the note and started with the usual questions. I told them everything I knew. but I left out the part about the dark web Santa call. What was I supposed to say? Oh yeah, I found this super creepy, untraceable website and let my niece chat with a virtual Santa who knew impossible details about her life. They've locked me up. One of the officers, a younger guy named Officer Daniels, noticed I was about to lose it. Look, he said, his voice softer than before, kids wander off sometimes. She probably went to a neighbor's, or maybe got curious about something outside. We'll find her, okay? I just nodded. But I knew. Chloe didn't wander off. She wasn't that kind of kid. She wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone. And that note. Santa's taking me to the North Pole? Come on. That's not something a 6-year-old makes up. That night, after the police left and Sarah was on the phone, crying her eyes out to Mark, I sat alone in Chloe's room. It was like she'd been erased. Stuffed animals lined up on her bed, drawings taped to the wall, everything in its place. Except for Chloe. I felt sick. I was supposed to be watching her. And now, I grabbed my laptop. I had to figure this out. I started with the email, the one that sent me the video call link. Santa's ready. It was still there, mocking me from my inbox. I clicked on the sender's name, hoping to find something, anything, an IP address, a location, some clue about who this psycho was. But there was nothing. The sender field was just a bunch of random letters and numbers. And when I tried to reply, recipient does not exist. Of course. I started searching online, anything I could think of. Virtual Santa call, dark web Santa, missing kids Santa call. I scrolled through forums, news articles, old blog posts until my eyes burned. Then, I found it. A thread, buried deep in some obscure internet forum. The title, Anyone heard of the virtual Santa call? My heart started pounding. I clicked. The thread was old, maybe 3 or 4 years, and it only had a few comments. But the first post made my blood run cold. My little brother did one of those Santa calls. He disappeared the next morning. Left a note saying Santa's taking me to the North Pole. Police never found him. There were a few replies, most of them calling it a hoax, a made-up story. But one reply stood out. It's not fake. I don't know who's behind it, but it's been happening for years. Don't click the links. Don't let your kids talk to Santa. I sat back, my mind racing. This wasn't just some prank. It had happened before. And now it had happened to Chloe. I spent the next few hours in a frantic online search. I checked every dark corner of the internet I could think of. But there was no clear answer. The virtual Santa thing wasn't some well-known urban legend. It was quieter than that. Like something people didn't want to talk about. The only thing I knew for sure was this: whoever was behind that call knew too much. They knew Chloe's name, her habits, her clothes, things no random stranger could possibly know. Was this some kind of stalking operation? A ring of people preying on innocent kids? But that didn't explain the note, or how Chloe just vanished. By 2 a.m., I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. I picked up my phone and called Officer Daniels. He'd given me his card earlier, told me to call if I thought of anything else. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Sir," he said, "it's the middle of the night." "What's going on?" I hesitated. "I need you to come back to the house," I said. "I found something. Something you need to see." He didn't ask questions. He just said he'd be there in 20 minutes. End of part 2. Okay, here's part 3, continuing the story. Part 3, he knows too much. When Officer Daniels got here, I showed him the forum post, the email, everything. I could tell he was skeptical. I mean, I sounded like a crazy person. "You're telling me this website set up a Santa call that somehow kidnapped your niece?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "I know it sounds crazy," I said, my voice shaking. I felt crazy. But look at the note she left. Look at what that post says. It's the same thing. He studied the screen for a long time, scrolling through the forum thread. Finally, he sighed. "I'll look into it," he said. "But you need to get some rest. We'll keep searching in the morning." He also told me to stop messing around online, but what was I supposed to do? Just sit here? After he left, I sat in the dark, staring at that blank, black website on my laptop. The cursor was still blinking, like it was waiting for me. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was sleep deprived, maybe I was desperate, or maybe I just wanted to see what would happen. I typed in her name again, Chloe. The screen flickered. Then, a single line of text appeared. "Chloe is safe with Santa. He'll see you soon." When that message popped up, "Chloe is safe with Santa. He'll see you soon," I felt this wave of, I don't even know, helplessness. It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was like someone telling me the weather, calm and matter of fact. I slammed the laptop shut. Whatever this was, I was done playing around. I'd let the cops handle it. But even as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, some crucial piece of the puzzle. The next morning, Sarah and Mark were back at the house. Sarah was trying to be strong, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She blamed me. And honestly, I blamed myself. The police showed up again, this time with a tech guy who started going through my laptop. Officer Daniel stayed close, taking notes, asking me questions. "Did you visit any other strange websites that night?" he asked. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Just that one. The link just appeared, I swear." He frowned, clearly trying to make sense of it all. "And this virtual Santa call, you said it felt real." "Too real." "He knew things," I said, "things no one else could have known. What she wore, what she said, even what we did the day before." Daniels didn't answer right away. He just wrote something down in his notebook and said they'd keep investigating. While the police were working, I sat in the living room with Sarah. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you think she's okay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know how to answer that. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm not going to stop looking." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "She's just a little girl," she whispered. "She doesn't deserve this." "I know," I said softly. "We'll get her back. I promise." That afternoon, while the police were still at the house, something weird happened. The tech guy, the one who'd been analyzing my laptop, came over to Daniel's. He was holding a USB drive, and he looked confused. "We found this," the tech guy said, his voice low. "It's strange." "What is it?" Daniels asked. The tech guy hesitated. "You'll want to see for yourself." They stepped outside to talk, but I saw the look on Daniel's face when he came back in. It wasn't anger, it wasn't even frustration. It was like he couldn't process what he'd seen. He pulled me aside a few minutes later. "Where did you say you got this link again?" he asked. "I didn't," I said. "It just showed up." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, something's not adding up here. That website you clicked on, it doesn't exist. There's no server, no IP address, nothing. It's like it vanished." I stared at him. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "I mean it's not traceable," he said. "And the video call?" "There's no data for it. No log. It's like it never happened." "Then how do you explain the note?" I asked, my voice rising. He didn't have an answer. That evening, after everyone finally left, I sat down with my laptop again. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. The police weren't getting anywhere, and Chloe was still missing. I went back to that forum, the one with the other missing kid. I started digging through every thread, every comment I could find. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't just one story. Over the past 10 years, there were whispers, little mentions here and there, about kids disappearing under similar circumstances. Each time, the details were eerily alike. A mysterious Santa call that felt too real. A child vanishing overnight. A note about going to the North Pole. No leads. No suspects. No answers. And the posts weren't all from the same place. They were scattered across different cities, states, even countries. The same pattern, repeating over and over. But here's the thing that really got to me. The posts always disappeared. If you clicked on the links too late, the page wouldn't load. It was like someone, or something, was cleaning up the internet, erasing any trace of these stories. I leaned back, my mind spinning. Was this some elaborate kidnapping ring? A group of tech-savvy predators targeting kids? Or was it something else? Something worse. I fell asleep at the kitchen table that night. When I woke up, the house was quiet, the sun just starting to rise. I made coffee and sat back down, staring at the laptop. Then I noticed it. A new email. The subject line, "We'll see you soon." I didn't want to open it. Every instinct told me to delete it, shut the laptop, walk away. But I clicked it anyway. The message was short. Santa never forgets a promise. Chloe is waiting. When I read that email, Santa never forgets a promise. Chloe is waiting. My stomach dropped. It felt like whoever sent it was watching me, toying with me. The worst part was, it wasn't even angry or threatening. It was written like it was just stating a fact. Come as you please. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I called Officer Daniels again. This time, I didn't hold anything back. I told him about the new email, the forum posts, all the creepy details about the Santa call that I'd left out before. He didn't interrupt me once. When I was done, he actually looked more worried than skeptical. "Okay," he said slowly, "let's figure this out, step by step. You said there are other cases like Chloe's?" "Yeah," I replied, showing him the archive forum posts I'd managed to save. They all follow the same pattern. The call, the kid disappearing, the note about the North Pole. Then the posts get deleted, like someone's covering it up. Daniels frowned as he scrolled through the pages. "This doesn't look random," he muttered. "Whoever, or whatever, is behind this, they've been doing it a long time." "Exactly," I said. "It's like a cycle. And Chloe's not the first." Daniel stood up, his expression unreadable. "I'll need to take this to my captain. But you," he pointed at me, "stop poking around online. If this is as big as it looks, you're putting yourself at risk." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. Truth was, I didn't feel like I had a choice. Waiting around wasn't going to bring Chloe back. That afternoon, I started digging deeper into those missing kids from the forum posts. The more I looked, the more messed up it got. Every case seemed to happen around the holidays. The Santa calls always came between December 1st and December 24th. And every single time, the kid left that same kind of note, "Santa's taking me to the North Pole." Then I noticed something else. Almost all the families had something in common. They were struggling. Single parents, tired guardians, people just looking for a little bit of magic for their kids. It was like this Santa knew exactly who to target. I sat back, rubbing my eyes. Whoever this was, they weren't just good with computers. They were watching people, studying them, finding families who were vulnerable, and kids who still believed. That night, I called Sarah. She'd been staying with Mark's family, trying to cope. But I needed to ask her something. Did Chloe ever mention anything weird before she disappeared? I asked her. Anything about Santa? Or someone promising her something? Sarah sighed. No, not really. She was just excited about Christmas, same as always. She did say something the day before she left, though. What was it? She told me Santa was going to give her a special surprise. I didn't think anything of it. She was just being a kid. Those words hit me hard. A special surprise. That's exactly what Santa had promised during the call. I hung up, feeling more determined than ever. If no one else was going to figure this out, I would. I went back to my laptop and opened that black website again. The screen was blank, but the cursor was still blinking. I typed again, Chloe. The screen flickered. A new line of text appeared, Santa will see you soon. This time, I didn't close the laptop. Where is she? I typed, my fingers shaking. There was a pause. Then, slowly, words appeared. She's safe. In the North Pole. A place where children are happy forever. I stared at the screen, feeling that helplessness again. You're lying, I typed. Where's the North Pole? What do you want? The screen flickered again. And then a video feed started. It was dark and grainy, like an old VHS tape. At first, I couldn't make anything out. But then, the image cleared. It was a small room, decorated with Christmas lights. A toy train circled in the corner. And in the middle of the room was Chloe. She was sitting on the floor, her back to the camera, playing with that stuffed reindeer she loved. She looked calm. Too calm. Almost like she wasn't really there. Chloe, I whispered. The video feed cut off. The screen went black. One last message appeared. Santa keeps his promises. Stop searching. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard. Chloe was alive. I'd seen her. But wherever she wasn't herself. I grabbed my phone and called Daniels again. I saw her, I said, the moment he picked up. They showed her to me. She's alive. Daniel's voice was tense. What are you talking about? Who showed her to you? The website, I said. It sent me a video. Chloe's in a room somewhere. But she's not acting like herself. I think someone's controlling her. There was a long pause. I'm coming over, Daniel said. Don't touch that laptop until I get there. When Daniels arrived, I showed him the laptop. But when I opened it, the black website was gone. The screen was blank. No trace of the video. It was here, I insisted. I saw her. She was right there. Daniels didn't say anything for a long time. We'll figure this out, he said eventually. But you need to get some rest. You're not helping anyone like this. As he left, I sat back down, staring at the laptop. I knew what I'd seen, and I wasn't giving up. The next day, Daniels came back with a whole team of tech experts. They hooked up my laptop to all kinds of equipment, running scans, looking for anything. But it was pointless. There's no trace of anything, the lead tech guy said after 2 hours. No video files, no website data, nothing. The system looks clean. How is that possible? I asked, frustration building. I saw her. There's a website. Santa's website. It has to exist. The tech guy just shook his head. It's like whatever you accessed wiped itself clean. That's not normal. Daniels pulled me aside as the team packed up. Listen, he said, his tone cautious. I believe you saw something. But we can't explain it right now. It doesn't mean we're giving up. If there's someone behind this, we'll find them. But I could tell, even he was starting to doubt me now. And I didn't blame him. If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. That night, after everyone left, I sat in Chloe's room again. It felt even smaller without her. I picked up that stuffed reindeer of hers and just sat there, turning it over in my hands. What does safe in the North Pole even mean? I muttered to myself. My phone buzzed. Another email. My heart dropped when I saw the subject line, Chloe's wish has been granted. I hesitated, then opened it. The email had one attachment, an image. I clicked. A photo filled my screen. It was Chloe. She was smiling, standing in front of a big Christmas tree, surrounded by presents. It looked like something out of a movie. Perfect. Too perfect. But there was something wrong with her smile. It was frozen, like she was just posing because someone told her to. And in the background, just barely visible behind the tree, was a figure. A man in red. Santa. I slammed the laptop shut. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a prank. Someone had Chloe. And they wanted me to see this. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, researching, looking for anything. Hidden web services, online kidnappings, urban legends, but there was nothing concrete. It was like chasing ghosts. Then, around 4 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Another email. You wanted to know where the North Pole is. Santa never breaks his promises. There was a link. I stared at it for a long time. I knew I shouldn't click it. But this was it. My last chance. Her last chance. I clicked. The screen turned black again, just like before. The faint sound of sleigh bells played through the speakers. This time, the message was different. Come alone. Or the magic fades. And then, an address. A real-world address, just an hour outside of town. I didn't call Daniels. I didn't tell Sarah. I knew they'd stop me. I grabbed my coat, my car keys, and drove. The address led me to an old, abandoned Christmas tree farm. The kind families used to visit years ago, before it shut down. I parked and got out. The place was dark and silent. But up ahead, I saw something. Lights. A small, wooden cabin stood at the far end of the property, glowing softly with Christmas lights. Smoke curled from the chimney. It looked welcoming. Too welcoming. I approached cautiously, every step crunching on the frozen ground. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. I reached the front door, which had a wreath hanging on it. I knocked. The door creaked open, slowly, like it was waiting for me. I stepped inside. The cabin was small and cozy, filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon. A fire crackled in the fireplace. And in the center of the room stood a huge Christmas tree, decorated perfectly. And sitting beneath it was Chloe. She was holding that stuffed reindeer, her eyes wide as she looked up at me. "Uncle Ben," she said softly, like she'd just woken up. I ran to her, kneeling down. Chloe, are you okay?" She nodded, smiling faintly. "Santa said you'd come. He told me to wait here for you." I hugged her tightly, relief flooding through me. "We're going home," I whispered. "We're leaving now." But as I stood up, I felt it. A presence. I turned around. There, by the fireplace, sitting in a large wooden chair, was Santa Claus. He looked exactly as I remembered. The beard, the suit, the smile. But his eyes, they were cold. Sharp. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm. "Chloe's wish has been granted. She's happy now." I didn't say a word. I just picked Chloe up, turned around, and walked out of the cabin. Santa didn't stop me. He didn't say anything. I could feel his gaze on me as I carried Chloe back to the car, but he didn't follow. We drove home in silence. Chloe fell asleep in the back seat, clutching her reindeer. I didn't ask her any questions, and she didn't offer any answers. When we got back to the house, Sarah burst into tears the moment she saw Chloe. She hugged her and wouldn't let go, sobbing with relief. I told the police I found Chloe wandering near the old tree farm. It was the easiest explanation, and they didn't question it. They just wanted the case closed. Chloe doesn't talk about what happened. When I asked her if she remembered the Santa call, she just shook her head. But sometimes, when she thinks I'm not looking, I catch her staring at that reindeer, like she's waiting for something. Christmas came and went. Life started to feel normal again. But every now and then, I think about that cabin. About the man in red, sitting by the fire. Who or what he really was, I'll never know. But one thing's for sure, some wishes shouldn't come true. And some doors are better left unopened, especially during the holidays. Alright, so let me get this off my chest. I've never been the type to post much online. I'm more of a lurker, you know? But something happened recently, something so freaky that I just can't keep it to myself. See, I've always been that guy, the one who's drawn to stuff that's probably better left alone. Like, I'm the dude who reads ghost stories way past midnight or watches those creepy YouTube videos just to get that little jolt of adrenaline. But what I did a few weeks back, man, I'm not sure I'll ever really get over it. It all started like this. I was in one of those deep dive moods where you're just endlessly scrolling through the internet, looking for something, anything, to distract you from the boring, same old of life. Work had been absolute hell. My girlfriend, Sarah, was away visiting family, and I just needed something to occupy my brain. Now, I'd heard about the dark web before, obviously. How it's this crazy, anything goes place where you can find literally anything if you know where to look. Drugs, weapons, illegal services, you name it. But that's not what I was after. I was more curious about whether the stories were true. Like, were there really these hidden corners of the internet where you could find videos that just shouldn't exist, or documents that the government supposedly doesn't want you to see? So, I did what any idiot in my position would do. I downloaded Tor. Yeah, I'd read all the warnings. People always say not to go poking around there unless you know exactly what you're doing. But the thing is, I figured I'd just take a quick peek. I mean, what's the harm, right? I'm not some master hacker, just a regular guy, let's call me Alex, with a regular job. I wasn't looking to buy anything, or get involved in any shady stuff. I was just curious. Navigating the dark web is like trying to walk through a maze in complete darkness. There are no street signs, no helpful maps, just a bunch of weird, random sounding URLs that make absolutely no sense unless you're already familiar with the territory. I spent, like, an hour just clicking around, mostly finding dead ends or these super creepy forums where people talked about things that made me uncomfortable in ways I couldn't have imagined. I was seriously about to call it quits, shut it all down, when I stumbled across this one site. No idea how I even found it, but the name was something like Lost Pages or Hidden Echoes. It had this really old, almost ancient look to it, like something straight out of the early 2000s. There was just this one, plain text box on the home page, asking for a phrase. And below it, there was this sentence, enter your deepest fear. Now, I know this sounds like the start of some cheesy, online horror game, but in that moment, it felt like some kind of challenge. So, without even really thinking, I typed in the first thing that popped into my head, isolation. The screen went totally blank for a second, and I felt this weird chill, like I just stepped into a walk-in freezer. Then, a new page loaded, filled with what looked like links to old books, journal entries, and letters. All of them supposedly written by people who lived a long time ago. But what really caught my eye was a link at the very bottom, separate from all the rest. It was titled, Your Story. I hesitated. I even thought about just closing my laptop and walking away. But, like I said, curiosity always gets the better of me. I clicked the link, and what I saw made my heart practically jump out of my chest. The page was filled with handwritten notes. Not typed, but actual scanned images of paper, like someone had taken an old-fashioned pen and just scribbled all over the page in a hurry. The writing was neat, but frantic, as if the person writing it was desperate to get their thoughts out before they lost their nerve. But here's the thing that really messed me up. The handwriting was exactly like mine. The same way I loop my G's, the way I cross my T's, all the same little quirks and mistakes I make when I'm rushing. It was my handwriting. And the words were mine, too. I'd never seen these notes before, never written anything like them, but they were describing thoughts I'd had, memories I didn't even know I'd buried. It was as if someone had reached inside my head and pulled out all the stuff I try to forget, the things I don't even let myself think about. I couldn't look away. One of the notes talked about this nightmare I had as a kid, where I was lost in a dark forest, calling for my parents, but only hearing my own voice echoing back. It was something I hadn't thought about in years, something I hadn't even told Sarah. Another note talked about the time I got lost in a shopping mall when I was 6, and how I'd never felt that kind of sheer panic since. I kept scrolling, my hands actually shaking now, and the notes just kept getting more personal, more invasive. Then, at the bottom of the page, there was a single sentence, not handwritten like the rest, but typed out in bold, black letters. You can't escape what's written. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it was going to explode. My room felt way too small, the walls closing in. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone, somewhere, was watching me, laughing at how easily I'd fallen into their trap. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside made me jump. I kept checking my phone, expecting some kind of follow-up, a message, an email, anything that would explain what I'd just seen. But there was nothing. The next day at work, I was a total wreck. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. All I could do was replay those notes in my head, trying to figure out how it was even possible, how someone could have written those things in my exact handwriting. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came a few days later, when I found the letter in my mailbox. A letter that made everything I'd seen on that site seem like child's play. That's when things really started to go wrong. I'm not even sure how to describe the feeling I got when I found that letter in my mailbox. It wasn't fear, not at first. It was more like confusion, mixed with a big dose of disbelief. You know that moment when you find something out of place, like your keys on the wrong hook, and you think, that's weird, but then your brain comes up with a bunch of logical explanations, and you just move on? That's where I was, except, as I stared at the envelope in my hand, no logical explanation made any sense. It was just a plain, white envelope, no return address, no stamps, nothing to show where it had come from. The only thing on it was my name, handwritten in that same eerily familiar script. My stomach dropped as I realized that it wasn't just familiar, it was identical to the handwriting on that website. My handwriting. For a minute, I just stood there on my porch, staring at the envelope like it was going to bite me. It's funny how your brain goes into overdrive in moments like that, thinking through every possible scenario, every potential threat. I even considered the idea that it was some elaborate prank, that one of my friends had somehow found out about my little dark web adventure and decided to mess with me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. None of my friends would go to such lengths, and besides, how could they have known about what I saw? Eventually, I took the envelope inside, my hands trembling as I slid my finger under the seal and ripped it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in thirds. I unfolded it slowly, as if I could delay whatever was coming by taking my time. And then I saw it, more of that handwritten text, sprawling across the page in tight, deliberate lines. It took me a moment to process what I was looking at because it was the last thing I expected. It was a letter, addressed to me, written in the same handwriting as before. But what made my blood run cold was that the words were lifted straight from my own journal. Yeah, that's right, I've kept a journal, on and off, for years. It's not something I talk about, not even with Sarah. It's just a place where I jot down thoughts, feelings, things I need to get off my chest. But this letter, it was like someone had taken one of my entries and copied it out, word for word. The letter started innocently enough, talking about a rough day at work, some stress I'd been dealing with, and how I'd been feeling a bit isolated lately. Pretty standard stuff. But as I kept reading, the letter began to mirror my exact thoughts, the ones I hadn't shared with anyone. I could feel my pulse in my ears, each beat loud and insistent, as the letter went on to describe my unease, my growing anxiety, and that gnawing feeling that something was just off in my life. And then, at the bottom, there was a single sentence, written in a different style, as if someone else had taken over. You can't hide from what's already been written. I dropped the letter like it was on fire, my hand shaking uncontrollably. This was no prank. No friend of mine could have gotten access to my journal. It wasn't online, wasn't synced to any cloud service. It was just a physical notebook I kept locked away in a drawer, the key to which was always on my keychain. I knew, with absolute certainty, that no one else had seen it. But then, how? I didn't even want to finish that thought. I spent the next hour tearing my apartment apart, searching for hidden cameras, bugs, anything that might explain how someone could have gotten into my most private thoughts. But of course, I found nothing. My apartment was just as it always had been, no signs of forced entry, no weird gadgets hidden away. It was almost as if the letter had just appeared out of thin air. I started to feel like I was losing it. Maybe I'd written the letter myself, during some kind of blackout, some split in my consciousness that I couldn't remember. But that didn't make sense either. I knew my own mind, knew I wasn't the type to dissociate like that. And even if I had, where had the letter come from? How did it get into my mailbox? The paranoia was eating me alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a shadow outside made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that whoever had sent that letter was out there, just beyond the reach of my senses, waiting for the perfect moment to make their next move. I stopped going out as much, started keeping the blinds closed, even during the day. Work became impossible. My mind was too consumed by what had happened, and I was terrified of what might come next. I even thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That someone had sent me a letter in my own handwriting, that I'd seen things online that shouldn't exist. They'd think I was crazy, and maybe I was starting to agree with them. But I couldn't just sit there and wait for something else to happen. I needed answers, and I figured the only way to get them was to go back to where this all started. So, against every instinct screaming at me to stop, I powered up my laptop and opened Tor again. I knew it was a mistake the moment I did it, but it was too late to turn back. I retraced my steps, clicking through the same shady links until I found that site again, Lost Pages, or whatever it was called. The home page looked the same, with that simple text box asking for my deepest fear. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitating, before I typed out the same word, isolation. The page loaded, but this time, the content was different. There were no journal entries, no letters, just a single, large block of text in the middle of the screen. Some stories are written before they happen. Others are written as they unfold. Yours is still being penned. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a mix of dread and resignation. I didn't know what to do next, didn't know how to stop whatever was happening to me. But as much as I wanted to shut down my laptop and walk away, I knew I couldn't. Not yet. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many things that didn't make sense. So I did the only thing I could think of. I clicked on the text. The screen flashed, and before I knew it, I was looking at a list of coordinates, dates, and times. At first, they didn't mean anything to me, just a series of random numbers. But then I realized that the first set of coordinates was for my hometown, and the date next to it was from years ago. The date of the day I got lost in that shopping mall. My blood ran cold as I scrolled down the list. There were more dates, more locations, each one corresponding to some event in my life that had filled me with fear or anxiety. But then I reached the last entry, and my breath caught in my throat. The final date was today. And the coordinates? They led directly to my apartment. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like the world had just tilted on its axis. My apartment, the place I had always considered my safe haven, was now the focal point of this bizarre, terrifying game. And the date, it was today. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever was happening, whatever had been orchestrating this nightmare, had planned for it to culminate right here, right now. My first instinct was to run, grab my keys, get in my car, and just drive until I was miles away from this place. But something held me back, a nagging voice in my head whispering that it wouldn't matter where I went. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't bound by physical spaces. If it could reach into my mind, into my private thoughts, then it could find me anywhere. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I braced myself for whatever was coming. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to go about my routine as normally as possible, ate breakfast, watched TV, even attempted to read a book, but my mind was elsewhere, constantly drifting back to that final entry on the website. My every move felt rehearsed, like I was following a script someone else had written for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that every step I took was part of some larger plan I couldn't comprehend. By the time night fell, my nerves were shot. I couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes without feeling that creeping sense of dread, like something was just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every little sound, my fridge humming, the wind brushing against the windows, set my heart racing. Around midnight, the anxiety became too much to bear. I decided to take a walk around my apartment, as if somehow that would clear my head, or at least burn off some of the nervous energy. My place isn't big, just a one-bedroom unit on the third floor of an old building. But that night, it felt like a labyrinth, each corner hiding potential dangers, each shadow deeper and darker than before. As I walked past my bedroom door, I felt a strange pull, like something was drawing me inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside, filtering through the blinds. Everything looked normal at first glance, my bed, neatly made, clothes piled on the chair, the faint outline of the dresser against the far wall. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air in the room was different, heavier somehow, like it was pressing down on me. And then I noticed the smell. It was faint, barely noticeable at first, but unmistakable. A scent like old paper, mixed with a hint of ink, the kind of smell you'd find in an ancient library or an old bookstore where the pages of the books have yellowed with age. It shouldn't have been there. I hadn't been reading in bed, hadn't brought any books into the room for weeks. I moved toward the dresser, my feet dragging as if the air itself was trying to hold me back. When I reached it, I hesitated for a second, my hand hovering over the top drawer. I knew I needed to open it, but a part of me was terrified of what I might find inside. My mind was racing, coming up with all kinds of scenarios. Maybe the letter would be there, or another note, something to further this twisted game. But what I found was even worse. Inside the drawer, lying on top of a pile of neatly folded clothes, was my journal. The same journal I kept locked away in my desk on the other side of the apartment. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead as I stared down at it. How had it gotten there? I hadn't touched it in weeks, hadn't even thought about it until all of this started. With trembling hands, I picked up the journal and flipped it open. The pages were just as I remembered them, my writing, my thoughts, everything in its place. But as I turned to the last entry, my heart skipped a beat. There was a new entry, one I hadn't written. The handwriting was mine, the loops and curves of the letters unmistakable, but the words, they were foreign, alien, like someone had crawled inside my head and jotted down their own twisted version of my thoughts. It described, in detail, everything that had happened over the past few days. The dark web, the letter, the growing sense of dread, everything. But then it went on to describe things that hadn't happened yet, things that were supposed to happen, tonight. The entry ended with a chilling line, the story ends when the truth is revealed. I slammed the journal shut and stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away from it. My breath was coming in short, panic gasps, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. This wasn't just some sick joke. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this was messing with my reality, rewriting my life like I was nothing more than a character in their story. I bolted out of the bedroom, not even bothering to close the drawer or turn off the light. I needed to get out of there, to clear my head, to breathe. I grabbed my jacket and keys, nearly yanking the door off its hinges in my rush to get outside. The hallway was dark and silent, the kind of silence that's almost oppressive, as if the walls themselves were absorbing every sound. I practically flew down the stairs, taking them two at a time, and burst out into the cool night air. The city was quiet, the streets deserted, the only movement coming from the occasional flicker of a streetlight or the distant sound of a car passing by. But even up there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, that somewhere in the darkness, eyes were following my every move. I didn't know where to go, didn't have a plan. I just started walking. My feet carried me down familiar streets, past closed shops and silent buildings, until I found myself in front of a 24-hour diner. It was a place I'd been to a few times, usually late at night when I couldn't sleep and needed a change of scenery. The neon sign buzzed softly, casting a pale blue glow over the empty parking lot. I went inside, the door chiming softly as I entered. The place was nearly empty, just a lone waitress behind the counter and an old man sitting in one of the booths, nursing a cup of coffee. I slid into a booth at the back, my back to the wall, so I could see the entire room. It felt safer that way, being able to keep an eye on everything. The waitress came over, a tired smile on her face, as she handed me a menu. I ordered a coffee, black, and waited until she was out of earshot before pulling out my phone. I needed to document what was happening, to write it all down before I lost my nerve or started questioning my sanity even more. Maybe, I thought, if I wrote it out, I could make sense of it, find some kind of pattern or clue that would help me understand what was happening. But as I opened my notes app, something stopped me cold. There, at the top of the screen, was a new note, one I hadn't written. The title was simple, just today's date. With a sense of dread settling over me like a heavy blanket, I clicked on it. The note was short, just a few lines, but they were enough to send a chill down my spine. You can run, but the story follows. There's no escape. Go home. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This was impossible. My phone had been with me the whole time. No one could have accessed it. And yet, there it was, another message, another piece of the puzzle that made no sense. I should have stayed in that diner, should have called someone, anyone. But instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I paid for my coffee, left a tip on the counter, and walked back out into the night. My feet carried me back to my apartment, every step feeling like it was being guided by some invisible hand. When I reached my building, I hesitated at the entrance, my hand on the door handle. The windows of my apartment were dark, the place looking as normal as ever. But I knew, deep down, that once I stepped inside, things would never be the same. I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and walked inside. The quiet of the building wrapped around me like a shroud. The hallway was empty, just as I'd left it, but there was a new sense of foreboding in the air, a heaviness that seemed to press down on me from all sides. I reached my apartment door, my hand shaking as I unlocked it and stepped inside. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the floor. Everything looked untouched, just as I'd left it. But there, on the coffee table, was something new. Another envelope, identical to the first one, waiting for me. And that's when I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stood there in the doorway, the darkness of my apartment feeling more oppressive than ever, my eyes locked onto the envelope on the coffee table. Its stark white color stood out like a beacon in the gloom. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to know what was inside. But I also knew I couldn't just leave it there. Whatever this was, whatever game I was caught up in, it wasn't going to stop until I played along. With a deep breath, I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, the click of the lock echoing through the silence. The envelope seemed to call to me, its presence in the room an almost physical weight on my shoulders. I took slow, deliberate steps toward it, my heart pounding louder with each one. When I finally reached the coffee table, I hesitated for just a moment before picking up the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have, as if the paper itself was saturated with the gravity of what I was about to uncover. My fingers trembled as I tore it open, revealing another sheet of paper inside, folded just like the last one. I unfolded the paper and felt my breath catch in my throat. The handwriting was once again a perfect match for my own, but this letter was different. It wasn't a copy of anything I'd written before, and it wasn't some cryptic message designed to mess with my head. It was a story. A story about a man who had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have, who had become the unwitting subject of a twisted experiment. As I read the letter, a chill ran down my spine. The story described a man who, out of boredom and curiosity, had ventured onto the dark web, just as I had. He found a mysterious website, lost pages, and entered his deepest fear into a text box. The website responded by showing him things that were impossibly personal, things that no one else should have known. But the story didn't stop there. It went on to describe how this man's life began to unravel, how he started receiving letters in his own handwriting, each one revealing more about his past, his present, and his future. The man grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that he was being watched, that his every move was being controlled by some unseen force. He tried to escape, but no matter where he went, the letters kept finding him, guiding him back to his apartment, back to where it all began. The final lines of the story sent a shiver through me. The man returned home, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. He knew there was no escape, that the story was already written, and he was merely living it out. As he opened the door to his apartment, he found one last letter waiting for him. This letter was different, though. This one didn't just tell his story. It told the truth behind it. I stared at those words, my mind racing. This wasn't just a story. It was my story, a perfect recounting of everything that had happened to me since I clicked on that damned website. But how? How could someone know all of this? It was as if they were writing my life as it unfolded, each word dictating my next move, each sentence sealing my fate. And then I reached the last line of the letter, a single sentence that made my blood run cold. The truth is waiting for you in the place where the story began. The place where the story began. My mind flashed back to the first letter, to the website, to that night when I accessed the dark web out of nothing more than curiosity. But no, it went back further than that, didn't it? The story didn't really start with the website. It started with my fear. My deepest fear. Isolation. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The website, the letters, the journal entries, they were all connected, all part of some elaborate plan to isolate me, to make me feel completely alone, like there was no one in the world I could trust. And it was working. I had distanced myself from everyone, shut myself off from the outside world, convinced that no one could help me. But why? What was the point of all this? I needed answers, and I knew where I had to go to find them. The letter had said the truth was waiting in the place where the story began. For me, that place wasn't just the website. It was my mind. My deepest fear. The one I had typed into the text box was what had set all of this in motion. I knew what I had to do. I walked over to my desk, where my journal usually sat, locked away. I'd been avoiding it, scared of what I might find. But now I understood that it held the key to all of this. I unlocked the drawer and pulled up the journal, my hand steady for the first time in what felt like days. Flipping through the pages, I skimmed over the entries, looking for anything that stood out. And then I found it. The first entry I'd ever written, years ago, back when I'd first started keeping the journal. It was about the time I'd gotten lost in that shopping mall as a kid, about the fear and isolation I'd felt, wandering through the endless corridors, calling for my parents but getting no response. I hadn't thought about that day in years, but now it all came rushing back. The fear of being alone, of being lost with no one to help me, had stuck with me all this time. And somehow, whoever, or whatever, was behind all of this had latched onto that fear, using it to control me, to trap me in this never-ending nightmare. But why? What did they want from me? As if in response to my unspoken question, I felt a strange urge to turn to the very last page of the journal. I didn't remember writing anything there, but as I flipped to it, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There, in the same familiar handwriting, was a message. A message I hadn't written. You are the author of your own story, but the ending has already been decided. Return to the beginning, and the truth will be revealed. I stared at the words, my mind reeling. The beginning. The shopping mall. The website. The dark web. Or was it something else? Something deeper, more personal? The letter had said the truth was in the place where the story began, but now it was telling me to return to the beginning. I knew what I had to do, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop. I needed to go back to the website, back to where all of this had started. I needed to face whatever was waiting for me there, to confront the truth head-on, no matter how terrifying it might be. With a deep breath, I closed the journal and set it aside. My laptop was still on the desk, the screen dark. I reached out and touched the keyboard, bringing it to life. The familiar icons appeared on the desktop, and for a moment, I hesitated. But there was no turning back now. I opened Tor and navigated to the website once more. The same text box greeted me, the same prompt asking for my deepest fear. But this time, I didn't type anything. Instead, I clicked on the blank space, my heart racing as the screen flickered and a new page loaded. Time seemed to stretch and warp around me as I stared at the figure standing in the doorway. The room felt like it was closing in, the shadows creeping closer, thickening the air. The man's face was still hidden, just a dark outline against the dim light. But I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting for me to make the next move. In his hand was the final letter, the one that would bring this nightmare to its inevitable conclusion. I didn't know what was in it, but I knew it held the answers I'd been searching for, the truth behind everything that had happened, the reason for all the fear and isolation that had been creeping into my life. But more than that, I knew it contained the ending to my story, the final words that would determine my fate. For a long moment, neither of us moved. It was as if the room had been frozen in time, caught in the tension between us. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure took a step forward, crossing the threshold into the living room. My breath caught in my throat as he extended his hand, offering the letter to me. His movement was smooth and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out of there, to do anything but take that letter. But I knew, deep down, that there was no escaping this. Whatever was happening, whatever had been set in motion, it wasn't going to stop until I saw it through to the end. With a trembling hand, I reached out and took the letter from him. The paper was cool and smooth under my fingers, the envelope sealed with a wax stamp that bore no insignia, just a simple, blank seal. The figure didn't move as I carefully broke the seal and pulled out the sheet of paper inside. The letter was written in the same familiar handwriting, the words flowing across the page in neat, precise lines. But this time, there was no story, no cryptic message or riddle to unravel. Instead, there were just a few short sentences, simple, direct, and chilling in their finality. You have been chosen to write the story. The pen is yours, but the ending is ours. Everything you have seen, everything you have experienced, has led to this moment. The truth is what you make it. I blinked, the words sinking in slowly, their meaning unraveling in my mind. Chosen to write the story? What did that even mean? Was this some kind of test, some twisted experiment to see how far I would go, how much I could endure before breaking? Or was it something deeper, something more profound? Before I could even begin to process it, the room around me seemed to shift. The shadows deepened, the walls closing in, and the figure in front of me began to fade, dissolving into the darkness like a wisp of smoke. But just before he disappeared completely, I caught a glimpse of his face. My face. It was like looking into a mirror, but not quite. There were subtle differences, little details that set him apart. He looked older, more worn, as if he had lived through countless lifetimes, each one leaving its mark on him. And his eyes were empty, devoid of emotion, of life, as if they had seen too much, known too much, and were now nothing but hollow windows to a soul long lost. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the room, the letter still clutched in my hand. The silence was deafening, the air thick with the weight of what I had just witnessed. My mind was a whirl of confusion, fear, and a strange sense of resignation. The words of the letter echoed in my head, the truth is what you make it. It took me a while to move, to process what had just happened. The shadows in the room seemed less threatening now, more like old friends than the enemies they had been just moments before. I looked down at the letter again, reading and rereading those final words, trying to make sense of them. And then it hit me. The truth was what I made it. This whole time, I had been a pawn in someone else's story, following a script that had been written long before I even knew I was a part of it. But now the pen was in my hand. Now I had the power to decide how this ended. I walked back to my desk, the laptop still open, the screen still showing that same haunting message. But now I saw it differently, saw it for what it really was, a challenge, a test of my will, of my ability to shape my own destiny. I took a deep breath, the fear that had gripped me for so long finally starting to loosen its hold. I knew what I had to do. I reached for my journal, flipping it open to the last page, where that mysterious message had appeared. I grabbed a pen, my hand steady as I crossed out the words that had been written there, replacing them with something new, something of my own making. The story ends when I say it does. As soon as I finished writing, a strange calm settled over me. The tension in the room dissolved like mist in the morning sun. The shadows in the corners receded, the air lightened, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. The sense of being watched, of being manipulated, faded away, leaving only the quiet hum of the city outside my window. I closed the journal and set it aside, my heart finally at ease. Whatever had been controlling me, whatever force had been writing my story, was gone. Now, the pen was in my hand, and the ending was mine to decide. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The streetlights cast a warm, comforting glow over the sidewalks, and I could see people walking, cars passing by, life going on as usual. It was a beautiful night, the kind that made you feel like everything was right with the world. And maybe, just maybe, it was. I had faced my fear, confronted the darkness that had been closing in on me, and in the end, I had taken control. The story was mine now, and I knew exactly how I wanted it to end. With a final glance at the quiet street below, I turned away from the window, a small smile on my lips. I knew that this wasn't over, not completely. There would be more challenges, more moments of fear and doubt. But now, I was ready for them. Now I knew that I had the power to write my own story, to shape my own truth. And that was a truth that no one, no matter how powerful, could take away from me. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, watching me. And then, without a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out something small, something that gleamed in the dim light of the room. It was another letter, the last letter. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. The story was over. The ending had already been written, not by some external force, but by me. By choosing to face my fear, by choosing to take control, I had written the final chapter. The figure, my doppelganger, or whatever he was gone. I was truly alone now, but it wasn't the crushing isolation I had feared. It was a peaceful solitude, a space for me to finally be the author of my own life. I never went back to the dark web. The laptop stayed shut, collecting dust on my desk. I started writing in my journal again, but this time it was filled with hope, with plans, with the everyday joys and struggles of a life lived on my own terms. Sarah came back, and I finally told her everything. It wasn't easy, but it brought us closer. The fear didn't disappear completely. It still lingered in the shadows, a reminder of what I'd been through. But now, it was a different kind of fear. Not a paralyzing terror, but a healthy respect for the power of the human mind, both its darkness and its light. And sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the streetlights cast long shadows on the walls, I think about that other version of me, the one who faded away. And I wonder, did he find peace, too? Did he finally escape the story that had been written for him? I like to think he did. I like to think that somewhere, somehow, he's writing his own ending, too. Okay, so, I've always been one of those people who's super into weird stuff, you know? Not like, let's go rob a bank weird, but more like, fascinated by the hidden corners of the world. The dark web was always that for me. It was like this mythical online underworld that most people wouldn't even dream of touching. It felt like the modern-day version of those old urban legends about secret libraries filled with forbidden knowledge, except this one was real. And yeah, I'd heard the stories about what you could find there, fake IDs, body parts, hitmen, you name it. But there were also whispers of the bizarre and unexplainable, like mystery boxes filled with God knows what. That's what really got me hooked. It wasn't until, like, last month that I finally decided to take the plunge. Getting set up with the Tor browser was way easier than I thought it would be. I just followed a quick YouTube guide, ironic, I know, and boom, within minutes, I was in. I was scrolling through these crazy marketplaces, forums that looked like they were coded in the 90s, and shady auction sites. Honestly, most of it was just junk. Overpriced fake passports, dodgy electronics, the usual. But then, I saw it. A listing that just screamed "click me." It was titled, Recovered Survivor's Journal, Classified Military Experiment, $150. The description was short but, oh boy, was it intriguing. This journal belonged to a military operative, codenamed Raptor, who escaped from a classified facility conducting experiments to enhance soldiers for warfare. Contents may be disturbing. Buyer discretion is advised. Now, I'm not gonna lie, my first thought was, yeah, right. It sounded like something straight out of a cheesy sci-fi flick. But, for some reason, I couldn't shake it. Maybe it was the whole forbidden knowledge vibe. Maybe I was just bored out of my skull on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Whatever it was, I found myself clicking that buy now button. I paid using some Bitcoin I had lying around, don't ask, and then came the waiting game. The package arrived a week later, in a plain brown envelope, no return address, nothing to give away what was inside. Super discreet, just like in the movies. Inside was this beat-up, old leather-bound journal. It had this weird, almost chemical smell, like it had been stored in some underground lab or something. The pages were all yellowed, and the handwriting was this frantic scrawl, like whoever wrote it was constantly freaking out or on edge. I took a quick pic of the cover and posted it to a Reddit forum dedicated to dark web finds. I figured, why not? The post got a few upvotes, but most of the comments were just people being skeptical. Probably a fake, one person wrote. Another was like, careful with stuff like this. Some of those sellers lace their packages with tracking devices. That one made me chuckle, but I still checked the envelope and the journal like a paranoid maniac. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That night, I started reading. The first few pages were pretty dry. The writer, who I guess was this Raptor guy, described being recruited for some special military program. It was full of acronyms and jargon that went right over my head. But then, about 10 pages in, things started to get weird. Raptor started describing these tests they were doing. And these weren't your typical military drills. No push-ups or obstacle courses. These involved some kind of chemical compound they called KX11. They were giving it to them through and for, and according to the journal, it was supposed to make you smarter and suppress fear. Raptor described feeling amazing at first, like he was lighter than air and his mind was razor sharp. But then, he started noticing the side effects. They told us the hallucinations were temporary, one entry read. But the shadows don't move like shadows anymore. They linger, watching. Sometimes they whisper. Shadows whispering? Okay, that's some straight-up horror movie stuff. But there was something about the way it was written that just felt off. It didn't feel like fiction. It felt like someone genuinely losing their grip on reality. And then I found something that really weirded me out. Some of the pages looked newer than the rest. Like, way newer. Like they had been added recently. The ink was darker, and the handwriting was slightly different. One of the newer pages had a message, and get this, it wasn't even written in pen. It was typed out, like with an old-school typewriter. It read, to whoever is reading this, stop. Burn the journal. Forget you ever saw it. This isn't a story you want to finish. I just froze. I mean, it wasn't like I actually believed it. But it still gave me this super creepy feeling, you know? Like a chill down my spine. I put the journal down, needing a break. Maybe I was just reading too much into it. Maybe it was just some elaborate prank by whoever put this whole thing together. Later that night, I was just chilling in bed, scrolling through TikTok, when I heard this faint tapping sound. It wasn't anything crazy. I live in an old house, so creaks and groans are pretty normal. But this was different. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone tapping their fingers on a table. I muted my phone and listened. It stopped. I shrugged it off and went back to scrolling. When I finally fell asleep, I had the weirdest dream. I was strapped to a chair in this cold, white room. There were voices, muffled, like they were coming through a thick wall. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they sounded angry. It wasn't until I woke up that I realized something super freaky. The dream matched a description from the journal almost exactly. That morning, I decided to dive back into the journal. I was determined to get to the bottom of this, or at least finish the story. Little did I know, the strangest part was yet to come. So, the next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee, stronger than usual. I needed it. I grabbed the journal and sat down at my desk, ready to face whatever weirdness it threw at me. There was a part of me, a small, sensible part, that wanted to just chuck the thing in the trash and forget about it. But, let's be real, curiosity, and maybe a little bit of stubbornness, had me hooked. I told myself it was just a strange artifact, maybe even a really elaborate hoax. But as I kept reading, the journal became harder and harder to dismiss. Raptor started writing about these group trials, which were basically like messed up team building exercises. They were supposed to test how well KX-11 worked in high-stress situations. They put all the participants in this big, windowless room and give them a bunch of tasks to complete. But here's the kicker, the tasks were designed to be impossible. Like, imagine trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces or build something with parts that didn't fit together. Seriously messed up, right? Raptor noted how the chemicals started to mess with their behavior. People who were normally friendly and cooperative started becoming cold, distant, and super focused on their tasks, even if those tasks were pointless. The entries described how their personalities seemed to fade away, like they were becoming robots. He called it losing the human filter. Small talk, emotions, it all became irrelevant. They were just machines, trying to complete their objectives. But then came the really freaky stuff. One by one, we started seeing things, he wrote. It wasn't just shadows anymore. Sometimes it was people they knew, family, friends. But they weren't real. And they spoke in voices that weren't theirs. We were told to ignore them, Raptor wrote, but it got harder every day. That last line really stuck with me. I glanced at the corner of my room, where the sunlight was making these soft, shifting patterns on the wall. I told myself it was just a story, a creepy story, but still just a story. I flipped through the journal, trying to stay focused, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A whole section of pages was missing. Like, completely gone. I wasn't sure if I had just missed it before, or if they'd been ripped out, but there was a clear gap between two entries. The last readable entry before the gap was chilling, day 47. 6 of us left. Command says the program is being discontinued, but we aren't being released. They're moving us. I don't think we'll make it out alive. When I flipped to the next page, it was like someone else had taken over. The handwriting was totally different, more erratic and fragmented. It was like someone scribbling down their last thoughts before totally losing it. One entry, in particular, stood out. They didn't shut it down. They scaled it up. If you find this, it means I failed to stop them. Burn this book, or they'll find you too. The use of they was unsettling. Who were they? The government? Some shadowy organization? Aliens? My mind was racing. I wanted to just laugh it off, tell myself it was all fake, but I found myself glancing around the room, feeling more paranoid than I wanted to admit. That night, I left the journal on my desk and tried to get some sleep. But when I woke up the next morning, something was different. A new page had appeared. I swear on my life it wasn't there before. It was crisp, clean, and sitting right in the middle of the book, like it had always been there. This wasn't like the older pages either. It was typed, not handwritten, and the message was simple: you're not done yet. Keep reading. I stared at it for what felt like an hour. It made no sense. I was the only one in the house. How could this page have just appeared? I even double-checked the locks on my doors, just to make sure everything was secure. Still, I couldn't shake this feeling of dread that was starting to creep over me. Later that evening, as I sat with the journal, I started hearing noises again. This time it wasn't just tapping. It was a low hum, almost like the vibration of an old refrigerator. But it wasn't coming from any of my appliances. It was faint, but it seemed to move, starting near the hallway and fading toward the living room. I got up to investigate, but there was nothing there. The hum stopped as soon as I stood up. It's probably just the house settling, I told myself, trying to sound convincing. Still, I couldn't focus on the journal anymore. That night, I closed it and left it on the desk, determined to ignore it until morning. When I tried to unwind by watching some YouTube, something really weird happened. Every video I clicked on froze after a few seconds, just showing a black screen with that little white loading icon in the center. My Wi-Fi was fine. Other devices were working. But for some reason, I couldn't play a single video. Out of frustration, I switched to Reddit. My post about the journal had a few more comments, but one in particular caught my eye. It was from a user with no profile picture or any kind of activity history. The message was short and to the point. Stop reading it. You're not ready for the truth. I stared at the comment for a long time, trying to decide if it was just some troll messing with me. I replied with a simple, "What do you mean?" but got no response. It was around that point that I started seriously questioning whether I should keep reading the journal at all. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't be able to resist. Something about it felt too important, like it was leading me somewhere, even if I wasn't ready for it. Even if I was scared. I spent the next morning trying to convince myself that I was seriously overreacting. The noises, the glitchy videos, the weird Reddit comment, it all had to be just a string of coincidences, right? My logical side was screaming that the journal was just an elaborate hoax, probably cooked up by someone with way too much time on their hands. But that other part of me, the part that had spent countless nights reading creepypastas and watching horror movies, whispered something else. What if it's real? The journal sat there on my desk, practically daring me to open it again. And, of course, I did. I'm weak, okay? As I flipped through the pages, something I hadn't noticed before caught my eye. In one of the earlier entries, Raptor had scribbled a string of numbers and letters in the margin. At first, it looked like random gibberish, but the more I stared at it, the more it started to look like a URL, specifically a dark web address. I hesitated. This felt like stepping into a whole new level of crazy. I mean, I was already in deep, but this was different. Still, curiosity won, as always. I booted up my laptop, opened the Tor browser, and typed in the address. The screen loaded slowly, agonizingly slowly, but eventually, I found myself staring at what looked like the most basic website ever. No logo, no images, just a black background with white text. At the top of the page was a single sentence, "Welcome to the truth." Beneath that was a collection of downloadable files with cryptic names like KX11 Overview, Test Subjects, and Facility Map. I didn't dare click on any of them. I wasn't even sure why this website still existed. If this was connected to some real, top-secret military experiment, wouldn't the government have taken it down by now? Still, it was there, staring back at me, like it was waiting for me to make a move. I closed the browser and shut my laptop. The journal was already overwhelming enough. I wasn't ready to add encrypted files into the mix. That evening, I decided to take a break from the journal. A real break. I cooked dinner, tidied up, scrolled through Instagram, normal stuff. But as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something weird in the bathroom mirror. It wasn't anything supernatural, just a faint smudge near the top corner, like someone had dragged their finger across the glass. I don't know why it bothered me so much. It was just a smudge, right? But I hadn't noticed it earlier, and it definitely hadn't been there the day before. I wiped it away with a tissue and tried to forget about it. But, like everything else related to this damn journal, it stuck in my head. I started to feel like the journal was somehow bleeding into my reality, not in a ghostly, paranormal way, but like it was changing how I saw everything. Every little detail, every odd noise, suddenly felt like it might be connected. The next section of the journal was harder to follow. Raptor's entries became more erratic, full of fragmented thoughts and cryptic observations. He wrote about the hum, describing it as a low-frequency noise that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He claimed it wasn't just a sound, it was a signal, designed to manipulate their thoughts and behavior. "It's not in your ears, it's in your head," one entry read. "They're tuning us like radios." I closed the journal and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I'd heard it too, hadn't I? But it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. It was just a suggestion, planted in my mind by the journal, like some kind of messed up reverse placebo effect. Still, the more I tried to dismiss it, the more I started hearing it again. Faint, distant, but definitely there. I decided to revisit my Reddit post, hoping someone might have some answers, or at least a different perspective. Sure enough, there were a few new comments. Most were the usual skeptics, but one stood out. Look closer at the smudges. The account was anonymous, no username, no profile picture, nothing. I didn't even know how it had found my post. The timing was too perfect to ignore, though. My eyes darted back to the bathroom mirror, where I had wiped away the smudge just hours earlier. What was I supposed to be looking for? Was it a code? A pattern? I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the mirror, just in case. When I zoomed in on the photo, I saw it. The smudge wasn't random. It had these faint, almost invisible lines running through it, like someone had drawn a grid or a map. It was hard to make out, but it looked deliberate. That night, I dreamt of grids and maps, of lines connecting places I couldn't recognize. When I woke up, the hum was louder. I couldn't shake off that dream or the weird map. It wasn't fear I felt, but more like a need to solve this puzzle the journal had presented. The website, the hum, and now this smudge, they had to be connected. I needed to figure out what that map on the mirror meant. I spent most of that morning obsessing over the photo of the mirror smudge. I transferred it to my laptop and messed around with the brightness and contrast, trying to make those faint lines clearer. After what felt like hours of squinting and zooming, I finally saw it. The lines weren't random at all. They formed a rough grid, and there was one part, near the center, that was circled faintly, in a sort of irregular oval shape. It wasn't a perfect map, but it was definitely something. Out of pure curiosity, I opened up Google Maps and started comparing the lines to real-world locations. It took some time, a lot of trial and error, but eventually, I managed to match the pattern to a real area. A desolate, empty-looking patch of land in Nevada, not far from a small town called Rachel. And get this, it was right near Area 51. Of all places. Now, I wasn't about to hop in my car and drive across the country based on some scribbles in an old journal and a smudge on my mirror. But the discovery was unsettling, to say the least. Why would Raptor, or whoever had added to the journal, leave a clue pointing there? Was that where the experiments had taken place? I tried searching for more information about the location, but all I found were the usual conspiracy theories and vague references to unmarked facilities. The deeper I dug, the more questions I had. Feeling restless, I turned back to the journal, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain the map. And sure enough, the next section provided another piece of the puzzle. Raptor wrote about being transferred to a new facility after the original site was compromised. He described the area as remote, surrounded by desert, with buildings buried partially underground. One line, in particular, stood out. The air there felt different, heavier, like it was charged with something. They said it was nothing, but I could feel it in my teeth. The way he described it sounded bizarre, almost supernatural. But I couldn't help wondering if it was connected to the strange hum I'd been hearing. Was it possible that whatever was happening in these experiments wasn't just psychological? Toward the end of the entry, Raptor mentioned something chilling. They gave us a new directive. If we didn't follow orders, the system would find us. We were told we couldn't run, no matter how far we got. What system was he talking about? Was it just a metaphor, or something more literal? The entry ended abruptly as if he'd been interrupted mid-thought. That evening, I decided to take another break from the journal. I tried to distract myself with Netflix, but my mind kept drifting back to the map, the coordinates, and the increasingly strange entries. Around 9 p.m., I got a notification on my phone. It was a Reddit message from an account I didn't recognize. The message was simple: "You're in too deep. Stop before it's too late." I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. I finally typed, "Who are you? How do you know about this?" But by the time I hit send, the account had been deleted. The message, along with the entire thread I had started, was gone. Vanished. I tried to brush it off as just another coincidence, but my nerves were shot. I decided to double-check all the locks in my house, even though I knew, logically, that I hadn't seen or heard anything unusual outside. As I turned the bolt on the back door, I noticed something. Another smudge. This time it was on the glass pane of the door, and it was almost identical to the one on the bathroom mirror. I didn't wipe it away this time. I just stared at it, wondering if it meant something, or if my imagination was finally getting the better of me. Later that night, as I lay in bed, scrolling through TikTok one last time, I heard the hum again. But this time it was louder, more insistent. It was still steady and rhythmic, and it was coming from the direction of my desk, where the journal lay. I sat up and looked across the room. The journal was still there, but something about it looked different. The pages seemed to be slightly fanned out, as if a breeze had shifted them, even though all the windows were closed. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe another new page, another cryptic message. I grabbed the journal and flipped to the last entry I'd read. There, at the very bottom of the page, was a new line of text that hadn't been there before. It was handwritten, in that same frantic scrawl. "You'll hear it louder tonight. Don't ignore it." I stared at the words, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like the realization that I was being pulled deeper and deeper into something I didn't understand. I wanted to put the journal down, to walk away from it all, but I knew I wouldn't. Instead, I sat there in the silence of my room, listening to the hum grow louder. The hum didn't go away that night. It stayed, a constant, low thrum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I lay in bed for hours, clutching the journal, feeling like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. By morning, the noise had faded, but it left behind an emptiness, an unease that I couldn't shake. I told myself, again, that I was done. No more journal. But that resolve lasted, maybe, 5 minutes. By the time the sun was fully up, I was back at my desk, flipping through the pages, desperate for some kind of closure, some kind of explanation. The final entries in the journal were a chaotic mess. The handwriting was barely legible, with large gaps between sentences, as if Raptor was struggling to stay coherent. He described waking up in his bunk to find his fellow test subjects gone. The facility was empty, but the hum, the signal, as he called it, remained. They didn't need us anymore, he wrote. We were prototypes. Disposable. What struck me most was the sense of utter loneliness in his words. This wasn't a man writing for anyone else. He was writing for himself, trying to hold on to the last shreds of his sanity. The final entry ended with a single line, scrawled hastily across the page. If you're reading this, it's already started for you too. I closed the journal and stared at it for a long time. What did that even mean? Was it just another scare tactic, a way to make the journal seem more ominous? Or was there something more to it? I decided to post one final update to Reddit, sharing some of the details I'd uncovered, the map, the coordinates, everything. To my surprise, the post gained traction almost immediately. Comments ranged from skeptical to fascinated, with some users speculating about hidden government programs and others accusing me of fabricating the whole thing. Then, another private message appeared in my inbox. It was from another anonymous account, and it simply read, "They're not watching you, they're listening. Be careful with the journal." The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. I tried replying, but just like before, the account was gone before I could hit send. I felt like I was trapped in a maze, every turn taking me further from anything that made sense. I considered taking the journal to the police, or maybe even a journalist. But the thought of explaining where I'd gotten it, the dark web, all of it, made me hesitate. Instead, I decided to see if there were any more clues I'd missed. That night, as I was flipping through the journal one last time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the inside of the back cover, faintly etched into the leather, was a set of coordinates. They weren't in Nevada this time. These pointed to a location in the middle of the ocean, far from any major landmass. I typed the coordinates into Google Maps, and what came up was just a blank expanse of blue. No islands, no markers, nothing. But as I zoomed out, I realized it wasn't far from the Bermuda Triangle. Of all places. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it another red herring? A final attempt by Raptor, or whoever had added to the journal, to keep the mystery alive? Or was there actually something out there? The next morning, something strange happened. The hum, which had been a near constant presence in my life for days, was gone. The house felt eerily quiet, almost too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I checked the journal again, half expecting another new page, another cryptic message. But there was nothing. It felt finished. I decided to put the journal away, locking it in a drawer where I wouldn't have to see it. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. Whatever had been happening, it seemed to be over. Or at least, I hoped it was over. The next few weeks were strange. I kept thinking about the journal, about Raptor, about the experiments, about everything I'd read. Was it all a hoax? A piece of elaborate, interactive fiction designed to mess with whoever bought it? Or was it something real, a glimpse into a world that most of us will never know? I still don't have an answer, and maybe I never will. The only thing I know for sure is that I'll never look at the dark web, or a quiet room, or a strange hum the same way again. And sometimes, when it's really quiet, I think I can still hear it, that faint, almost imperceptible hum, reminding me that there are some doors that are probably best left unopened. Some mysteries that are best left unsolved. Alright, so, I've never been the type to go poking around in the dark web. Seriously, it's the kind of thing you hear about on those late-night podcasts, or maybe a true crime documentary on YouTube, right? It's painted as this shady, messed up corner of the internet where you're bound to find something that'll scar you for life if you're not careful. But hey, boredom and curiosity are a dangerous mix, and they can lead you down some seriously weird paths. I'm not exactly proud of it, but that's precisely how I ended up cruising the depths of the dark web on some random Saturday night. It all started, as these things often do, with a Reddit thread. I was just killing time, scrolling through r/internet mysteries. You know, the usual stuff about unsolved online puzzles and creepy digital urban legends. Then someone posted about this supposedly cursed .onion link. Of course, half the comments were calling it total BS, while the other half swore it was some legit creepy stuff. The original poster claimed it was nothing graphic, just a live stream of random places all over the world. A few users were like, it's obviously a prank, but a surprising number insisted it was anything but. That was enough to get my attention. Honestly, getting tore up and running wasn't as hard as I thought it'd be. I mean, I'm no tech genius, but a couple of YouTube tutorials later, and I was in. DuckDuckGo became my best friend as I navigated this strange new world. At first, the .onion link the Reddit user posted seemed like a dud. I figured I'd been had, classic internet move, right? But I kept refreshing, don't ask me why, and then, boom, the page finally loaded. It wasn't exactly mind-blowing at first glance. Just a black screen with a plain text box that said, enter your location. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is where a normal person would just nope out of there, close the tab, and maybe pour themselves a stiff drink. But not me. Oh no! My curiosity was fully engaged at this point. I had to know if this thing was real. So, I typed in the name of my street, nothing too specific, just enough to see what would happen. The screen went black for a few agonizing seconds, and then a video feed popped up. My initial thought was, okay, it's probably just some random video loop of a street somewhere in, like, I don't know, Europe or something. But the longer I watched, the more familiar it all started to look. The cracked pavement outside that old corner store, Mr. Henderson's beat-up mailbox, that one streetlight that always flickered, it was my street, no doubt about it. And it wasn't some old recording either. Cars were driving by in real time, and I even spotted Mrs. Gable's ancient, blue pickup truck parked outside her house, just like always. I leaned in closer to my laptop, totally mesmerized. How was this even possible? Who made this thing, and what was the point? The video quality was surprisingly good, especially for something supposedly lurking on the dark web. I could make out every little detail, the chipping paint on the house across the street, the way the shadows of the trees danced in the streetlights. But then, things started to get weird. The further down the street the camera panned, the blurrier the image became. At first, I figured it was just a crappy connection or some low-budget camera. But as the feed moved towards the end of my street, I saw it. A house. A big, two-story house with all its lights blazing. The only problem? There shouldn't be a house there. I've lived on this street my entire life, since I was a little kid. I know every house, every yard, even every pothole. And there's absolutely nothing at the end of my street except for that empty, overgrown lot where a house burned down ages ago. It's just weeds and junk now. But on this live feed, there it was, a house. A house that didn't exist. The longer I stared, the more a feeling of dread started to creep up on me. It wasn't like there was anything obviously scary happening. No shadowy figures lurking in the windows, no blood-curdling screams, nothing like that. It was just wrong. This house shouldn't have been there. It didn't exist in real life. And yet, there it was, on this bizarre live stream, like it had always been a part of the street. Like I was the one who was wrong. I sat there, staring at this phantom house on my screen, feeling completely weirded out. It just didn't make any sense. I mean, how could a live feed show something that straight up didn't exist? I double, triple, quadruple checked Google Maps, zooming in on Street View like a hawk. Just like I remembered, the end of my street was nothing but that empty, weed-infested lot. No house, no lights, just a whole lot of nothing. Back on the creepy live feed, though, the house was still there, porch light shining like a beacon in the blurry distance. I refreshed the page, thinking maybe, just maybe, it was some kind of weird glitch. But nope. The video reloaded, and there it was again, same house, same eerie glow. I must have watched that feed for hours, just waiting for something. Anything. Some kind of explanation. But nothing happened. Cars drove by, my neighbor, old Mr. Johnson's dog, wandered into the frame for a sniff around the sidewalk, the usual. The house at the end of the street just sat there, completely out of place, yet somehow looking totally normal at the same time. It was like it belonged in some alternate reality, not mine. It was probably close to midnight when I finally forced myself to close the tab. My head was spinning. Who was running this feed? How were they even getting a camera pointed at my neighborhood? And the biggest question of all, what was the deal with that house? I tried to tell myself I'd forget about it by morning. That it was just some elaborate prank or some kind of augmented reality thing, you know? But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, that house was all I could see. It didn't feel like a joke. It felt too real, too detailed, and I had no idea what to do about it. Part of me was tempted to just walk down to the lot, in person, just to see what. I didn't know if the house was actually there. But honestly, I was too chicken. What if it was there? What would I even do then? Call the cops? Hey, officer, yeah, there's a phantom house on my street that I found on a dark web live stream. Yeah, that wouldn't sound crazy at all. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep, but it was a restless kind of sleep. I kept dreaming about that house, its lights glowing faintly in the distance, like it was watching me. When I woke up the next morning, I made a promise to myself, no more dark web for me. I was done with that creepy feed. But, of course, promises like that are easier made than kept, especially when your brain's latched onto something it can't explain. That entire next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. That house felt like a splinter in my mind, a detail that was totally wrong but impossible to ignore. I tried to distract myself. I scrolled through Instagram, watched some random YouTube videos, even went for a walk to clear my head. When I got to the end of my street, I looked at the empty lot. Still empty. Still overgrown. Still no house. That should have been enough to convince me to drop it, right? Wrong. Later that evening, as the sun went down and my room was filled with that soft, dim light from my desk lamp, I found myself doing the unthinkable. I opened the Tor browser again. The link was still there in my history, staring back at me like some kind of digital dare. Before I could even talk myself out of it, I was back on that black screen with the text box, "Enter your location." This time, I hesitated. Something about it felt even more wrong than before, like I was crossing some invisible line. But, like I said, curiosity is a powerful drug. I typed in my street name again and hit enter. The feed loaded faster this time. And there it was, my street, stretching out in front of me, bathed in the familiar glow of the streetlights. You could even hear the faint hum of cicadas in the background, just like in real life. But then, the camera panned to the end of the street, and there it was again. The house. This time, seeing the house again felt different. It wasn't just unsettling, it was like a challenge. I leaned closer to the screen, determined to find some detail, some clue I'd missed before. The house itself looked so ordinary it was almost painful. 2 stories, beige siding, a small porch with a single rocking chair. The front door was closed, and the windows just reflected the dim streetlights. If I didn't know better, I have sworn it had always been there. But this time, I noticed something new. The camera seemed to linger on the house, like really linger, way longer than it did on anything else in the feed. It wasn't moving like a normal security camera, sweeping back and forth. It was almost deliberate, like whoever was behind this thing wanted me to pay attention to that specific spot. I pulled up Google Maps again, switching to satellite view this time, just to triple check. Still nothing. The lot was empty. There wasn't even a shadow where the house might have stood. It made 0 sense. How could a live feed show something that straight up didn't exist in the real world? That's when a new thought hit me. What if it wasn't my street? What if the feed was showing some other neighborhood that just happened to look eerily similar? I started Googling, typing in things like beige house 2 stories and suburban street at night, hoping for a match. I scrolled through pages and pages of images, but nothing was quite right. Frustrated, I went back to the live feed, deciding to take a more systematic approach. I started jotting down every detail I could see, the numbers on the mailboxes, the license plates on the parked cars, even the faint graffiti on the side of the convenience store. Everything matched my street exactly. There was no mistaking it. Except, of course, for the house. My head was spinning now, filled with all sorts of crazy theories. Maybe it was some kind of elaborate augmented reality project? Or a really sophisticated glitch in the feed? Or maybe, just maybe, it was something else entirely. Something stranger. I didn't want to jump to any wild conclusions, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it all made. I decided to try one last thing. Using my phone, I took a screenshot of the feed and sent it to my friend Ethan. He's way more into tech stuff than I am. I didn't tell him where it was from, just that I'd found it online and wanted his opinion. His response came back almost immediately. Dude, where is this? It looks exactly like your street, but what's up with that house? Did they build something new? No, I replied, it's not really there. It's an empty lot in real life. He sent back a string of question marks, followed by, that's super weird. Send me the link. I hesitated. Something about sharing the link felt wrong, like I was dragging someone else into something I didn't even understand myself. Can't find it again, I lied. I'll try later. Ethan didn't push it, but his reaction only made me more uneasy. If even he thought it was strange, then it wasn't just me overthinking things. There was something genuinely off about that feed. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was important, somehow. Not in a spooky, horror movie kind of way, but like it was trying to tell me something. I just didn't know what. And, honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. Still, a nagging question kept bouncing around in my head. If the house didn't exist in real life, then why did it feel so real? By the next day, that nagging feeling had turned into a full-blown obsession. I needed to figure this out. It wasn't just idle curiosity anymore, it felt personal. This was my street, my neighborhood, and yet here I was, questioning reality itself. I decided I needed more context, something to help me make sense of it all. So, I started where anyone would, the internet. I typed in dark web security feed and went down a rabbit hole of forums, blogs, and Reddit threads. Most of what I found was either fear-mongering garbage or completely outdated. But a few posts mentioned similar incidents, people stumbling on live feeds of their own neighborhoods with unexplainable differences. A lot of the threads were filled with skeptical replies, but one comment caught my eye. Sometimes these feeds show things that used to be there. Like a time capsule, but not like weird stuff. Man, that stuck with me. Could the house on the feed be something from the past? I hadn't considered that before. The lot had been empty for as long as I could remember, but what if there had been a house there once? And if there was, why was it showing up now? I decided to dig into the history of my neighborhood. I started with the obvious places, local Facebook groups and community forums. You'd be surprised how much information you can find when you're willing to scroll through endless posts about lost pets and yard sales. Eventually, I came across a thread about the empty lot at the end of my street. Someone had asked if the city had any plans for it, and the replies were a mix of speculation and vague memories. But one comment stood out. There used to be a house there, back in the 80s. Big fire took it out. Sad story. That was it. My first real lead. That comment about the fire was like a punch to the gut. It was the first solid piece of information I'd found that connected the empty lot to an actual house. I immediately replied to the commenter, asking if they knew anything more. They responded a few hours later with a link to an old article from the local paper. The headline read, "Family of 4 dies in tragic house fire." The article was short, just a couple of paragraphs, but it laid out the grim details. A fire had ripped through a 2-story house on my street back in 1987. The cause of the blaze was never determined. The family who lived there, a couple named Robert and Carol Davies, and their 2 young children, a girl named Lisa and a boy named Ben, had all perished. The house was a total loss and was demolished soon after. The lot had been empty ever since. Reading that article felt like someone had kicked the wind out of me. I'd always known the lot was abandoned, but I had no idea it had such a tragic history. And now, here I was, staring at a live feed of a house that shouldn't exist, a house that felt like it had been plucked straight out of the past. The family's name, now it felt more than just a mystery. It felt like I had a responsibility to the people who had lived there, to figure out what was going on. I opened the Tor browser and typed in the link, half expecting it not to work, like maybe the universe was telling me to back off. But no such luck. The feed loaded right away, just as clear as before. And there was the house, standing at the end of the street like it belonged there. This time, I noticed new details, a wind chime hanging on the porch, a flower pot by the front door. The rocking chair swayed gently, as if caught in a breeze, even though the trees around it were perfectly still. I watched for hours, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the house remained eerily still, almost serene. I couldn't explain it, but it felt peaceful, like it wasn't trying to scare me, but to be seen. I couldn't look away. Eventually I pulled up an old photo of my street on Google's archive, taken years ago, before they'd remodeled the convenience store. I zoomed in on the empty lot, and sure enough, you could see faint remnants of a foundation, cracks in the pavement where the house had once stood. The pieces were starting to come together, but I still had more questions than answers. Was the feed somehow showing the past? And if so, why did it feel so real, so present? That night, I closed the tab and stepped outside, needing some fresh air. I walked down to the lot and stood at the edge, trying to picture what it must have looked like back then. The house, the family, their lives before everything changed. It was almost like I could feel their presence, not in a creepy way, but like the air itself held a trace of them, like the lot still remembered them. I knew I wasn't done yet. Whatever was happening, I was only scratching the surface. But for the first time, it didn't feel scary. It felt like a story waiting to be told. After uncovering the history, I felt this strange sense of obligation to the Davies family. Like I had to see this through, for them. The next few days were a blur of research. I dug through online archives, city records, even old phone books, trying to find out everything I could about the Davies family. It wasn't easy. Most of the records from that time were either incomplete or hadn't been digitized yet. But I managed to piece together a few more details. Robert Davies had been a mechanic, and Carol had worked part-time at the local library. Lisa, their daughter, had loved to draw, and Ben, their son, was obsessed with dinosaurs. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make them feel more like real people and less like names in a tragic news story. That following night, I loaded the feed again. And this time, I noticed something different right away. The feed was glitching. Faint static flickered across the screen in short, irregular bursts. At first, I thought it was just my connection, but the glitches felt deliberate, like they were forming a pattern. Between the static, I could make out faint shapes, almost like words, but they disappeared before I could read them. Determined not to miss anything, I grabbed my phone and started recording the screen. The glitches continued, the shapes becoming more distinct with each flicker. I paused the recording and replayed it frame by frame, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, I saw it. A single word, flickering in and out of the static, remember. It sent a chill down my spine, not because it was scary, but because it felt so personal. Remember what? The house. The family? Was it connected to the fire? I stared at the word, trying to make sense of it, but the feed had already moved on. The glitches faded away, as if they'd never been there. I kept watching, hoping for more clues, but nothing else appeared. The house remained quiet, its lights glowing faintly against the dark. It felt almost serene, like it was at peace with itself. But I wasn't. The message stuck with me, its simplicity making it all the more unsettling. Someone, or something, wanted me to remember. But I still didn't know what. The next day, I decided to try something different. I went back to the city archives, this time focusing on property records. After hours of searching, I finally found what I was looking for, the original deed for the house on my street. And there it was, the previous owner's name, Robert Davies. Seeing his name on that official document made the whole thing feel even more real. It also confirmed that the house on the feed was the same house that had burned down in 1987. That night, I loaded the feed one last time. The house appeared as it always did, standing at the end of the street, illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlights. It looked quieter than ever, as if it knew this was the last time I'd visit. I leaned in closer, watching for any sign, any flicker of static, or hint of a message. For a while, nothing happened. The camera stayed focused on the house, its lens steady and unblinking. I almost closed the tab, thinking the story had come to an end. But then, the porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow over the front steps. And then it happened. The feed glitched, just like before. And for a brief moment, the screen was filled with static. This time, though, the message was clear. Thank you. I blinked, half expecting the words to disappear, but they lingered for just a moment longer before the feed returned to normal. The owl stood there, quiet and unchanging, but the message had left a profound stillness in its wake. I didn't need to see anything else. Whatever the else was, whatever it represented, it had found peace. I sat back, letting the weight of it all sink in. The Davies family's story wasn't mine to tell, but I'd done my part to remember them. Maybe that was all the owls had ever wanted. Not to scare or haunt, but to ensure that the lives it once sheltered weren't forgotten. I closed the tab and turned off my computer, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The owls, the feed, the strange pull of the past, it all felt like a chapter that had finally been written. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the faint glow of the streetlights outside my window, I realized something. The owls didn't need to exist in the present to matter. Its presence on the feed wasn't about proving anything. It was about preserving a memory, a moment in time that refused to be erased. The next day, I walked past the lot again. This time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like it had been filled with something invisible but meaningful. Like the air itself held a trace of the family who'd once called it home. I didn't need the live feed anymore. I'd seen what I needed to see. And just like that, the link stopped working. I tried accessing it a few more times out of habit, but it always led to a blank screen. I wasn't disappointed, though. The owls had done what it needed to do. It had been remembered. To this day, I still think about the Davies family whenever I pass that lot. I don't know how or why the owls appeared on that feed, but I've stopped trying to explain it. Some things aren't meant to be solved. They're just meant to be seen, to be felt, and most importantly, to be remembered.